Yeah.
So I have no idea how much I charge it.
All right, we're gonna get started here. If you guys are watching at home, hello. Please keep yourselves on mute so that we don't experience any feedback. And then if you have questions, we'll just pause and let you guys unmute and ask your question. I don't think we're gonna be able to see if you're typing in questions, so you'll have to chime in. Thank you all for being here. This is exciting. If you need to go to the bathroom, you go out this way, turn right down the hall, and then they'll be on your left. You already know about the food and coffee. Sorry, guys at home. There's literature on this table, so Pierce County Fresh literature. I printed out a sheet for you all to take home, and I can email it to everybody. But it has grants, like links to grants. Obviously, you have to type them in, and then contact information for everyone who's presenting here today. And if you are a farmer in Pierce County, please join Pierce County Fresh website. It's free, and it's just marketing for you guys. This is being recorded, and then we will have it posted probably to our website, so you can come back and access it again if you want to brush up on anything or send it to somebody that you know. And so my name is Misha Ide. I'm the manager of Pierce County Fresh, and along with Denise over here, we are both farmers, and so it's really important to us that this program gives you guys the tools to succeed. And sometimes those tools are things like getting free money. And we're really unique in that there are some grants available to individual business owners, farmers, where usually it's like nonprofits. And so as Dr. Bill will talk to you about, she normally talks to nonprofits. So I'm excited to have her here. And I'm going to read her little bio. So she is at City University of Seattle and directs the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. And their mission is to offer high quality educational opportunities to further strengthen nonprofit organizations throughout Washington State, or in our case, for-profit farms. And I thought this was fun. In her spare time, she likes to read, travel, craft, rollerblade, and chase after her two tiny dogs, Tinsel and Poppy, which the visual of me is you rollerblading after them.
Well,
she's an incredible resource. I've heard her speak at the Washington State Farmers Market Association conference last year, and it was really, really, really valuable, because writing grants is really not easy and doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. So thank you for coming, and go ahead and get started.
Pleasure. Okay. Hello, everyone. How y'all doing?
Hi.
You'll see a slide of me being introduced again, because I have a little spiel I have to go through, but we'll just go quickly. I had a pointer or a clicker at one time, but there it is. So I am Angela Beard. I have a lot of silly, expensive degrees and a lot of grant writing experience. I will put that out there so you know I'm a credible resource. I've been writing grants since 1990, which I hate to really think about because it's longer than some of you have been alive. But enough of that. Here we are. Sanford's mission, as Misha read to you, is to offer fundraising training for free, yes, I did say free, to working professionals in the nonprofit sector, in this case, the for-profit farming sector. We really just want to help people make a difference in their communities, which y'all are doing. So, without further ado, let's get on to the presentation. How many of you, I'm going to take a little poll, are here because you plan to write grants as an individual business, like individual farmers, or as opposed to a nonprofit organization? So about 2/3 of you. May I assume the rest of you are writing for your organization, a nonprofit? You're here because you just want to learn? We've got nonprofits in the room. Yay, okay, great. I always learn something when I teach or present. And one of the things that I learned in preparing for this was that there actually are grants available to individuals, which I was like, wow, never happens in my world. So thank you for that opportunity. I try to write, if you will, and use terminology for both individuals and organizations. But if you're confused on a point or something's not, if you're like, is this for the nonprofit or for me as an individual, please interrupt me at any time. I'm pretty informal, as you can see, so questions welcomed and encouraged along the way. So I would like you to be able to walk out that door today understanding how to approach writing a grant, what the fundamental components of an application are. And these are true across the board, whether you're writing for an organization or as an individual. And we'll get into it in just a minute, but if you get those in place up front, you save yourself a lot of time later. And then we'll talk about budgets as well, which are a component of the grant application, but not narrative. They're numbers, which sometimes makes people twitch. So I'm considering that its own topic, okay? So before you begin, and I have pulled up the guidelines to the two grants that are my, what are they, my predecessors or my successors will discuss with you, the USDA one and the TILT one. I hope I'm getting that right. Everybody know what I mean? Okay, cool. So you understand what I'm referring to. So we can kind of look at the two. They're really quite different. One is, of course, federal funding, and one is, it looks like private, administered by TILT. So right now, right in front of you, you've got two great examples that, how many plan to apply to these programs? Okay, awesome. Of how different grants can be. Okay, so I'm gonna, without further ado, or you have them in your hands, right? You guys have, yeah, hi.
I have a question.
Sure,
So
hit me.
we do have a nonprofit, but I was, so can you tell me what would be the benefits of doing first?
Carlotta didn't want to interrupt. You want to go around the other one?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the granting program, to be honest with you. In most cases, nonprofits are eligible for grants that individuals are not. Because foundations incorporated by the IRS
Does this guy ever shut up?
or
It's recording too, so we can always go back and review people's notes.
Hey, you guys, if you don't mind muting yourselves, that would be great. Thank you.
I lost my train of thought. So if you go to the Rockefeller Foundation, for example, individuals don't qualify. The Rockefeller Foundation is incorporated to give money to qualifying nonprofits, which is why we want to check eligibility first off to make sure that we are eligible to apply to a particular program, right? And if you're eligible as an individual and a nonprofit, then I would say to you, the strength or weakness is going to be the program itself. That makes sense, right? Clear to everybody? Makes sense to everyone? Okay. So before everybody have their little instructions in hand. So before you will begin writing a grant, you really want to look at what are called guidelines.
Does anybody need this? This is a good tilt one, so there might not be enough for everybody. Oh, I only have about 3 of them. It's all online, and you will apply online.
It is online, and
You guys can like look over each other's shoulders.
and I will go and hop over right now, show you. I hope I'm not going to screw this up. If I do, thank you for your patience in advance. So here are the TILT guidelines, okay? So this goes through everything, eligibility, right? Can you guys see it at home? So what makes you eligible? Individual farm businesses cannot receive more than $20,000. All right, there's information that's helpful. Currently employ or adopt practices that follow regenerative, sustainable, and or organic principles. Have been in business for at least 2 years. Are seeking to improve or expand their operation, improve environmental impacts, or become a more sustainable business. Now we go to our friends at the USDA at the federal government level. So who may apply for this program? Here are the eligibility requirements for them, right? See here, independent producers, agricultural producer groups, farmer or rancher cooperatives, and majority, pardon me, I lost my place, majority controlled producer-based business ventures. So you've already, there's 2 different pools of eligibility. Now I think probably the people in this room fit into both somehow, right? If not, you've already saved yourself some time by not going through all the application and filling it out only to discover that you are not eligible, right? So check eligibility and deadlines. Most funders do have deadlines, not all, but most of them do have application deadlines that you have to meet. You have to get that thing postmarked or into an office by a certain date. The TILT one is in January. USDA, couldn't find a deadline, so maybe we can check with our friend when she gets here later on today about that. This helps you plan your work. Why? You look through the requirements, okay? Especially for the federal one, and you'll see, okay, they need to know about me. Okay, I can tell them my address, I can tell them my name, I can tell them my business number, but I don't have a DUNS number. I don't have a budget in place yet. So you'll start separating out what you do have, what you don't have, and the don't have pile. You're like, okay, this is easy. I just need to go find the paperwork in my drawer that tells me, what my EIN is or what my business license number is. But producing this thing, narrative or the budget or something else, it's going to take me a while. So what am I going to start with? Everybody with me? Okay. Now, in the nonprofit fundraising world, we encourage nonprofits to write what's called a case for support. So if you are going to be continuing to raise money, if you are with a nonprofit that may go on beyond these 2 grants, I would encourage you highly to write what is called a case for support for major programs that you wish to seek funding for. And the case for support is a grant application, essentially. It has all the same components, but you don't have to go back and redo it every time. You write your program description once, right? And you're done. You write your organizational achievements once, and you're done. You can draw on it for all fundraising pieces. If you're not going to, then yeah, you'll have to do a lot of work for 2 applications. If you get $20,000, it's worth it, right? Everybody with me so far? Okay, am I scaring you already? Some deer in headlights looks so. Okay, so I've skipped ahead. Okay,
Sorry. No, it's over there and then over here.
No, I'm underneath this.
Sorry, you all. It's my worst.
Right there, yeah.
it's all. Okay, one more.
Can you control it with your clicker?
Well, right now it's not happy.
Goes out of the chat window.
Pardon me?
That's good.
Oh, you guys can see that chat window? Sorry. Just rid of it. Me?
Yeah.
I don't have a mouse. Oh, there it is. What am I clicking on? Click.
Other way, backwards.
Sorry,
please. That's
guys.
okay. Okay, one more. Yay! Okay, so it helps you to find your work. I'm getting back on track. What can I put in motion now? What do I need to get on right away? And what is a simple thing that I just need to go and print out a list or a form? Okay. You also want to read through the requirements to make sure if you get it. Money coming in the door is not the end of the process, right? There are always going to be reporting required, financial accounting for the grant required that you're going to have to manage, or someone on your team, or someone that you pay, or whatever, pertaining to especially a federal grant. The feds are not, they make you work for your money, but we love them. So you make sure that you're going to be able to complete those requirements ahead of time, so you don't take the money and then go, uh-oh, right? So those are the links. In case anyone doesn't have a handout, I put the links on to the 2 grants we're referring to today, and you can either follow along on your phone or later when you get the slides if it helps. That's cool. So then you want to start thinking about how you're going to write the requested grants components. And I don't know how, but I sit in the car when I'm in traffic or in the shower, or sometime when I'm, have really some time for mental reflection. I'm like, okay, I think through, now how am I going to talk about this program? How am I going to talk about the need, right? So use your time. Think about what you're going to do, okay? And this is a 30,000 foot. What you're going to do, what need it fulfills in the community, what goals you have for your program, and there's more of this. I'm just, shooting off the cuff, and how you're going to measure your success. Those are the 4 principal things grantors. If you're applying for a federal grant, and this is an important point because one of these is federal, you have to get a DUNS number, okay? A DUNS number is this number provided by the Dun & Bradstreet firm. If you go on to, if you Google DUNS, it'll take you right there. The only thing is that you just want to do it ahead of time, because if you wait till the night before, right, which don't we all have the temptation to do, you'll be in trouble because you won't be able to submit the next day. So if you know you're going to apply for this grant, go out when you go home, get a DUNS number, and be on your way,
How long
okay?
does it take to get one?
Well, it doesn't usually, it can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. No, it's free.
I will just make a note, I do grant writing for farmers, and there's some websites that are false that do charge a fee up to $500. So if somebody asks you for money, it's the wrong website.
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And feel free to keep speaking up as we go on, because believe me, I don't know it all. I'm continuing to learn. Okay, so getting your DUNS number, and if I were you, and I don't have time, we only have an hour, so I'm not going to go into all the relationship building that you might want to undertake, which is really the core of fundraising. But I would reach out to the program officer with questions, or to introduce yourself before you even start writing. If you look over the eligibility and you look over the application, you're like, I'm not sure I quite understand what they're asking for here. These folks get paid to give you money, okay? A program officer at a foundation or a nonprofit that's a grant-making entity, government, that's their job. You're not bugging them. You're not, being a pain. It's not impertinent or whatever. Call them up and introduce yourself and say, I'm thinking about applying for, how you doing? For X grant, I'm with this farm. I'm sorry if I'm not getting all the details exactly right. And we really focus on what you're funding, and I don't understand this on your application. I don't think you're stupid. They get paid to answer your questions and give you money. So I would highly encourage you to go ahead and reach out, start building a relationship with that person. Down, I assure you. Okay, so what are the components? These are the essential components of a grant proposal. And again, terminology, if you speak up if there are any different terms for, the business that you're in. First thing you want to focus on is a need statement, okay? A need statement is the problem that you're attempting to solve in the community. Now, one of these applications or one of these programs, it is given to you. It is the USDA one specifically says, how are you going to mitigate climate change? If you've read it yet, I don't know, but I was reading it, and they want to fund programs that are mitigating climate change by the introduction of new products into the market. So that's something to think about in the shower. How am I mitigating climate change with this proposed project? Because the problem's been given to you. Okay? Does that make sense? So far, everybody with me? Next, you want,
Sorry.
That's okay.
And maybe by climate change mitigation, that means like reducing carbon emissions on your farm, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the truth of the matter is I looked at some of the examples and I didn't understand what they were. So we can have a look at the application itself, and you can tell me how it helps mitigate climate change. And you can think for yourself, how is it me doing this on my farm going to help mitigate carbon emissions or all the other nasty things that come with climate change?
We're going to hear from USDA and Communities and TILF about their specific grants.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't take it on myself to pretend to be any kind of experts, because the experts are coming. I'm the grant writing expert, they're the program funding experts. So We want to talk about the, we will have to talk about the problem though in some form. Project description. Okay, first of all, what are our goals? Okay, what are our goals? Obviously, for USDA, you're gonna, hi, how you doing? Your goal is to reduce climate change in some fashion, right? These have to be measurable and they have to relate to how you're going to measure your success. Okay? With me? Everybody? How are we going to do this? That's called the methods section. It's also sometimes called the project description or the narrative. The funders love to make us think hard and figure out what they're asking for, and there are many different names for this section. But basically, it's what are you going to do? Who, where, when, and how will your project happen? Okay? This is what you guys already know. This is the easy part. This is probably what you're excited about doing. You know, I'm going to, you know, introduce this project by growing this thing and selling it here, and be sure to include planning and evaluation. And you get to talk about your solution to this problem, right? Evaluation. How are we going to measure whether or not we achieved our goals? What does success look like to us? And how are we going to measure it? And sustainability. How does this project live beyond the grant if awarded? And that's, I should have, I changed it on another slide, though. I apologize, I didn't on this one. Not only live beyond the grant, but what other resources am I bringing to this project? Or is my organization bringing to this project, okay? At least in, hi. Yeah, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. At least in conventional fundraising, funders do not want to be the only support for your project. Why is that? What do y'all think?
Financial stability.
Financial stability, right? You need to invest in your own project sometimes, but yes, that's always good to show. Pardon? Leverage. Diversity of funding sources shows the funder that if they don't give you money, don't give you as much as you asked for, or go away, program doesn't die, okay? Because usually there's someone on the receiving end of your services, a client or customers who need what you do. And the funder doesn't want to think that, you know, hey, if we don't give them money, those people go without. So it's good to show that you have a multiple sources of funding or are seeking them. You don't have to have them in place already, especially because you're usually writing this grant way out ahead of when your project's going to happen, right? But you do have to show that you've thought about it, and you're seeking other sources of support, either other funders, sales, you know, there are any number of avenues, especially in the strictly nonprofit sector. Oh, don't leave me, you're helping so much. That you can list, and there's a way to do it where you can show that it's maybe not, it's proposed or tentative or pending, but you are thinking about it. You are not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Okay, you're gonna have to talk about yourself or your organization and your experience or credentials and information about yourself or organization, your farm, your nonprofit, to show that you have credibility, that you can get this thing done, right? And then you have to have a project budget. Okay, these are the core components, all right? And if you can do these, you'll be in good shape for the 2 applications that we're talking about today. Again, if you decide to go on and do more, a wider fundraising effort or broader, there are little things that come in, like sometimes they ask you for there's an executive summary, and there's a closing, and there's, you know, impact statement, all kinds of things. If you come across that, you know, feel free to reach out to me. In an hour, I'm trying to get through these so that we can send everybody away able to do these 2 applications. Okay, so far so good? Any questions yet? No? No? Not one? Guys, am I that good of a teacher? Say yes. So let's start with the need statement. Okay, I'm focusing on this a little more than might be necessary for what you have to do because it is hard. It's the hardest thing to write in a grant, and it is important, and it requires you to think with a different mindset, especially if you're in a for-profit business, okay? So the need statement is a statement of the need or problem facing those your organization intends to serve. And why is this a different way of looking at it? It's only about the problem, okay? Lots of grant writers, I teach this and all the time, people, bless their hearts, are so excited about what they're proposing that they skip right to the solution. We're gonna solve poverty because we're opening a shelter and a soup kitchen and da-da. Well, that's awesome. That'll be great in your project description, but what's the problem? What's the need, right? So it really needs to be in terms of a community issue or gap, or something is missing that you intend to address, right? So again, what it is not, the proposed solution. The organization's needs without reference to community impact or benefit. So again, in nonprofit speak, say you work at a nonprofit and it's old and tiny and you've got roof leaking and mice and who knows what else. It is not appropriate to start your fundraising by saying, we need a new building. Why not?
That's the organization's need.
That's the organization, right? Do funders care if you need a new building? No. They care about what's not being, how your clients are not being helped because your roof is leaking and your building's falling down. Does that make sense? It's a shaded gray, but a super important one, okay? And again, your opinion or passionate concern unsupported by evidence. And this is important because you have to demonstrate that a problem is a problem. And my favorite example, this is kind of morbid example, but my favorite example to show to my students is when I'm teaching them about this, I was like, okay, why 1 out of 6 children in this country is hungry? Why is that a problem? And they're all like, well, what do you mean? Hungry kids is no good. You know, they have health outcomes, they don't do well in school. And I'm like, yes, you're absolutely right. All that is bad. But what you're taking for granted is that your funder knows and that they care more about that than they care about the next application they're going to read that talks about domestic violence. There's competition in the funding world, right? The better you can articulate the need and the problem of the community and the extent and the impact, the more competitive your application is going to be. It's an ugly truth, but there you have it, right? Does that make sense to everybody? We work with in our businesses every day. We love what we do for the most part, I think. And we think it's important work that solves problems in the community. So does the nonprofit or farm down the street, right? Does that make sense? So, moving on, some of the elements of the need statement that you can use when you're documenting your need are supportive evidence to describe the nature and extent of the problem. What's the incidence of the problem that you're talking about, right? So again, when we talk about hungry kids, it's 1 in 6 in this country, the richest country in the world, right? And you get on, you Google childhood hunger in the United States, and you start doing a little research. You guys are going to be like, you know, climate change or carbon emissions or, you know, issues with soil. I'm sorry, I don't know more about your particular business, but, what is, gasoline in the earth doing to the way we grow food and feed to people? I'm sorry, again, I don't know the business as well as I would like to. How widespread is it? Who's affected? Where does it happen? Okay, so it's the incident. The factors contributing to this problem. this is, you have to talk about them, but you've got to be careful not to go down the rabbit hole, okay? So, like, coming back to childhood hunger, I mean, obviously, it's mostly about poverty, right? Poverty is hugely, strongly associated with childhood hunger. But if you start talking about what causes poverty, you'll be writing a dissertation and still won't have gotten, you need to keep it focused on what your solution is, okay? So say you were writing, I'm big on childhood hunger, which not the way it sounds, that's bad, but I'm very passionate about it, so I use this as an example a lot. So say you wanted to start a summer feeding program, and you were trying to raise money for this. And you go to start writing your need statement, and need is the problem is childhood hunger in the summertime, right? Well, there are probably a million factors that contribute to that. Poverty, low access to food, all kinds of things. But you aren't going to just proposing to solve them all. You're proposing to solve them in the summertime. So what's the biggest problem in the summertime that keep kids hungry? School's not open, right? So that is the big factor that you're focusing on in your attempt to address childhood hunger. What kids do when school's not open. Makes sense? Because if you went off on poverty and, you know, income inequity and all kinds of things, you'd be, focus. Okay, identifies current gaps in services or programs. Childhood hunger example, again, in my class when I teach this, there is in Snoqualmie, no, not Snoqualmie, it's one of the northern communities. Closest one is Issaquah. It's a small, close to the mountains community, I'm old, I can't remember the name, where there is no childhood summer feeding program. So say they wanted to start one. Okay, well, the closest one is Issaquah, which is 36 miles away. Squamish?
Yeah.
Snoqualmie? Okay. So what's the gap there? Well, there's nothing in Snoqualmie. Just nothing. It's a big zero, right? And anybody who doesn't have a car can't get to Issaquah. And even if you do have a car, you're going to drive 72 miles every day. You might, kids, but you hear what I'm saying, right? So there are the gaps. Often where applicable, you can use an existing solution in another community. Again, on the sort of feeding program thing. We don't have one in Snoqualmie, but we know that when it's provided in Issaquah or Burien or any other community, kids get fed. We believe we can replicate that here and keep kids from going hungry in the summer months. Okay, everybody with me still? All right. So let's take 3 minutes, and each of you think of your own projects. And yes, I am going to pick on people, so be ready. And we're going to go through this, because if you can answer these questions, you can write a need statement. All right? Everybody have their little pens out or their brains working? The problem my project / organization is trying to solve is one sentence only. Just one. Write it down.
I'm going to take this opportunity to remind people who are calling in to please mute yourselves so we don't have any feedback issues. Thank you.
Sometimes it might be easier, I guess, to think of it also as an opportunity. So, you know, I live in a community where the only place people can buy food is 7-Eleven, and everybody's living on old hot dogs and, you know, pretzels and da-da-da. I'm going to introduce the opportunity to have fresh produce and really, you know, healthy dairy and that kind of thing. Different projects and require kind of different spin on it, okay? This problem is caused by 3 max. 3 causes max. You know your business, right? So what is that problem caused by? There are no, we're all learning, so there are no, nothing's out of bounds right now. Now what you know. And later use the Google machine and learn more. If you can't do it, that's okay too.
Camille, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you push the mute? It's like a little microphone button on your end.
Okay, done. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Are you doing okay? Do I need some help? Okay. Now, having gone through those two questions, the cost to the community if this problem persists are the remaps. What are the costs to community? Is throw them all out there. And then later you go and see if you're right. Health outcomes, economic. Environmental. Anyway. Are you okay? Everybody stumped? This is hard stuff, folks. The need statement is the hardest thing to write as far as I'm concerned in any grant application. So if it's hard, that's normal. Don't worry.
I think it's challenging too because the farmers aren't necessarily required to talk about the community aspect. It's helpful,
Mhm.
but it might not translate exactly across.
Right.
But the building blocks are still the same.
Yeah. Anybody want to share? Come on, Misha.
So this is
Be bold.
This is actually, my husband and I got the Human Links Tilth grant a couple years ago, so I'll use that example. The problem we were trying to solve is that we needed access to WSDA poultry slaughter because we raise chickens. And the problem was caused by there are very few people producing or have the licensing for that to do it for us. So I guess all of the problems are basically caused by access, but the only processor available to us was up on the border with Canada. And so that was going to cause like a huge usage of fossil fuels for us to transport our chickens up there and back down, several hundred miles round trip twice a month. And so the cost to the community or to our farms, economic and environmental sustainability were huge amounts of gasoline and fossil fuels cost, right, just in transportation, and then also quality of life for those chickens that are now having to be trucked. So that was our problem.
Good. Perfect. That jiving with that, you guys? Just kind of see where we're going with that? Okay. So we've already talked about this. Sorry, wrong button. Okay, so need statement written, problem you're trying to address. Now here's the fun part, like I said. How are we going to do this thing? And everybody has to write this, I know, for both applications. So even though the need statement doesn't quite maybe translate, this guy will. So project description, again, it might be called a narrative, it might be called your proposed solution. Basically, it is what are you going to do with this money? Okay, so what are your goals? What were your goals for your chicken example?
Well, we wanted to get our own trailer, processing trailer that was licensed through WSDA.
Okay, because you wanted
Do
to,
on-farm processing of our own poultry.
I'm gonna keep pushing you,
Yeah.
because you wanted to,
Reduce our fossil fuel reliance.
bravo, there you go. Your goal is to reduce your fossil fuel impact. Perfect. Okay. Now, how were you planning on doing this? I'm picking on you, Misha, sorry. So the money would have enabled you to,
Purchase,
you is the who, you and your husband, right? When is throughout the course of your business, right? Year round, I don't know when you do your chicken slaughtering, but is that,
it's seasonal.
it is seasonal, so that when you would talk about that, June, August, whenever, January, I don't know, it is. Where, this is important, right, on your farm, and how. You would have your trailer and you would do your thing and describe it, right? Everybody with me so far? Does that make sense to what you're thinking about doing? Okay, excellent. Now, how will success be measured? Well, dare I ask?
How many birds can we slaughter in a
That's,
season?
yeah, but you remember what was your goal? Because to reduce fossil fuels. So you could literally go out and I'm sure it's out there somewhere in the interwebs, right? And say, okay, because we didn't drive 400 miles a month, we saved this much in carbon dioxide, and so we feel that we successfully accomplished our goal. Right? Everybody with me so far? Okay. Sustainability, did you happen to, this is the hard one too, did you
Yeah.
look at any other funders? Did you?
Well, we were able to buy the unit and keep it, so
Okay.
it's now ours.
Yes, but when you were applying is what I'm saying. Was this program the only one you applied to, or did you have some
For
others?
this project, it was.
Okay. Good for you, you were lucky.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
But some,
Actually, I correct myself. We applied, we did use a crowdsource campaign,
okay.
crowdfunding to pay the balance.
And you may have, I don't know, but I imagine you may have been willing to contribute some of your own cash if you had to. So all of these would have been listed in the sustainability section of your application if you were writing it today.
I should have reread before today.
That's okay, you're doing great. All right, so everybody, this is the wonderful example. Everybody understand the sustainability thing? The thing that, an easy way to think about it for me is, what if we don't get this money? Or what if we don't get the full amount that we asked for? What are we gonna do? Are we gonna, look, what other sources are we going to go to for revenue, for cash, right? Or will we abandon the project? That's another option, right? Remember, when you're talking about your project, to include planning and evaluation as part of it, We are going to, in the winter, we're going to figure out what we need to do in the spring on our farm, and then we're gonna do it, and it's gonna happen in the summer, and then in the fall, we'll take a look back and say, okay, how did we do? Did we reduce carbon emissions? Did we get rid of the gas in the soil and have healthy crops? Did it work? That funders like to see that. They want to know that you're going to use the feedback that you get from whatever you do to continue to improve. So far, so good. Everybody with me? Got 20 minutes left. I think I'm doing okay. No questions? No questions. Already?
Does anyone calling in have any questions?
Onliners, yeah, hi.
Got a question from Zoomland.
Okay.
I'm just curious with the mobile processing unit example, did they feel compelled to make that access available to other chicken farmers in the area? Was that part of the grant or not?
So it was part of our grant, but it wasn't it was a maybe, because we knew logistically it wasn't going to be that easy to implement, and we aren't at a place where we can implement it yet, but it's definitely something that we're talking about, and if you want to talk after, we can do that too.
Other questions from Zoomland? Okay. All right, so when I write these project descriptions, I usually find it helpful to be answering questions. So what I put on this, I relisted them, and then put the question that I put in my head to write. So I'm going to encourage you guys to bullet. You don't have to write a narrative, obviously. Your own ideas as we go through. So when you're thinking about your goals for the project, what change do you want to see in the world as a result of this project? Methods, again, this one's pretty easy, usually. Who is staffing? When will the planning, execution, and evaluation take place? Where? And how will the program be executed? All right? You guys are the experts on this. You know what you're going to do. This is the fun part. How will success be measured? Who, and what metrics will evaluate your program? Okay? In Misha's case, they evaluated it themselves by comparing carbon emissions here, carbon emissions here. Pretty straightforward, right? This might be, are you going to see an increase in your sales, or what's your goal, and how you measure it, and who will measure? Questions on that? And what other plans or revenue sources are in place to make sure the program can be executed and last beyond the grant funding, if that's applicable? I mean, with a capital request for a processor, obviously they got it, it's working, they're going to keep rolling with it. But sometimes if you're asking for program support or something, program that you're going to execute, the funder doesn't want to see that it's going to end if their funding goes away, like after year 1. So this is what you're going to address in your sustainability section. Okay, questions? Yeah.
Are some of these things negotiable? Like if you submit your proposal and they're like, oh, I don't quite understand this line, do they call you back? Or is that
No.
that's like a no?
Well, they will call you. Well, let's get into the relationship building a little bit. If you establish a good relationship with whoever the program officer, that's again grant speak. It might be what's your I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Carlotta.
Carlotta, what are you, like a program officer? I manage this funding program.
I'm with USG
Right.
Development, and I'm a specialist
Okay.
that handles the value-added producer grant as well as some other things.
So Carlotta is a specialist, so she's not called a program officer, but she's in charge of managing the granting program. So when you start looking at the value-added producers grant, and you don't understand how to answer a question, remember how way back at the beginning I said, call, and now you're gonna be getting all these phone calls. But that's your job, right?
I do get paid to help people.
Exactly.
Get money from it, so
You would call up Carlotta and you say, hey, I'm considering applying for the VAPG, what do you?
Value-added producer.
Value-added producer grant. I don't understand what you're looking for in this part of the application. Would you mind speaking with me? She's gonna help you, right? And, right, you do your thing and you submit your application. Now, I'm not gonna speak for Carlotta because I'm not going to, but the better relationship you have with a funder, program officer, the more likely they're gonna be to call you and say, this isn't correct, or this isn't what the board's going to want to see. Would you consider, you might want to revise it, change it, do it in a different way so your chances for funding are improved. Or this section is missing. Or, if you don't have a good relationship, they might still do that. They're all good-natured people who want to help you, but it's less likely. I will be quite honest with you. Someone who if you send your application cold and have never spoken to the person on the other end, your application is incomplete or has errors, they're more likely to in the round file. Just say. And you've heard it here from the expert, they get paid to give you money and to help you get it. So don't be shy about that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Now let's talk about the grant budget. Now, I'm going to Can I come over there and switch without us getting messed up?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not doing anything, I'm just standing here.
okay. There's a pretty comprehensive budget sheet for the value-added producer grant. So let me try to bring it up without messing up our PowerPoint or our Zoom thing. Okay, so here's the value-added producer, and they are this is how do I get started before you apply. See, they need a DUNS number. Can you guys see that? Is it big enough on the screen? And you just register for the System for Awards Management. So that is an online portal that is where you're going to submit your grant applications, right? Am I stealing all your thunder, Carlotta? When we get down here, we have I found this last night. Where is it? Forms and resources. Everybody see that tab? There are there's information required forms down here, right? Application instructions, the application form itself, assurances, which is basically that, you aren't a terrorist and you aren't going to steal their money and you understand the requirements, right? And budget information. Now, look at this budget form. Okay. This tells you when you're looking at this to begin with that they're a lot more interested in budget information than are the TILF folks, okay? They give you a number of categories here, which are very similar to the ones that I have in the PowerPoint if you cross-reference them. They're going to want to know, about your personnel. Who's on this program and how much you're paying them? What are their benefits? Is there travel involved? Do you need to purchase equipment or supplies? What about contractual help, like consultants or temporary workers that aren't employees, right? Is there a construction component to it? And then other. You total that, and then it looks like y'all fund indirect. Is that the case, Carlotta?
Not on the value added.
Okay, so another thing to check for is everybody know the difference between direct and indirect costs. Okay. I put my finance hat on because I have one. When you are doing a project, direct costs are those that are incurred in delivering the program. And the ones above all these, value added considers your direct costs. For people and materials and construction directly related to your program. Okay? Indirect, which they don't fund, but TILF might, or another funder might, are costs that are necessary for the operation of the enterprise, but are not directly related to the program. So a perfect example of that is a bookkeeper or finance folks, if that's not you. Indeed, it's not you. You need those folks to pay your bills, pay your salaries, make sure that your payments get processed, etc. But they're not farming, they're not out there doing whatever it is that you guys are doing that directly provides that service. Does that make sense? So they are indirect costs. And in this case, they are not allowed in this as part of this award, if you get it. So you would not put that in your budget. Okay? Remember going back to reading the instructions? The instructions will state quite clearly what is funded and what is not. And indirect is a big thing to look for because it's very, some do, some don't. I'd say 50, 60% do and 40, 50% do not fund indirect to funders. So you gotta look carefully at the instructions for that. Okay?
So you include it, but you're not asking for it? You're not asking for that money?
I don't think you include it,
You don't even include it.
right?
So
But again, I'll defer to our expert here.
On what part of the budget?
Would you include indirect even if it's not funded? No.
So why is it even a line item?
Because that form is a form that's used for, I don't know, maybe 50 different federal grants.
Yeah.
So some grants, we don't even want all that information, there's barely anything we need. But some, it does need to be broken out. So it's just that it's used for so many different program grants.
You'll see that that also matters up here, right? When I was looking at it, I was like, estimated unobligated funds. I'm like, what? Because this is used for a number of programs, this may not be applicable to your application. The only time it's going to be is if you are already receiving money from them and some of it has not been spent. Is there anybody in this room who is receiving federal funding from USDA or, okay, so this doesn't apply to you, okay? You don't have to fill it out. But again, you gotta read the instructions super carefully and they're to know what you need to fill out and what you do not and how to do that. Everybody, go ahead.
And for the value added within the application templates, which is more narrative and some other things, the budget is going to be broken out there in detail. So you're almost doing it there first and then figuring out how it will go into this form correctly. So I wouldn't get too worried about it. It'll help you.
Okay, how's everyone doing? You're all looking a little frightened right now, or some of you are. Yeah, hi.
So there's probably a lot of different types of grants. How often are you allowed to apply for grants? Like
For
you
one
apply-
agency?
Yeah.
Well, that depends. I'm gonna have to use my own background. So there's a National Endowment for the Arts, I worked in the arts most of my career. The federal funding arm for the arts. I work for Ballet Company, they have a dance program. We were only allowed to apply to the dance program once a year. But they also had a touring program and a challenge grant program for pushing your organization forward, sustainable. And I applied for all three of those. One application per program or category a year though. That's at the federal level. It's generally the same with private foundations or any other funder, but you never know. I mean, again, I'm coming back to the relationship thing, but sometimes you apply for funding and they've literally run out of money. It does happen, right? The organization, even though you're only supposed to apply once a year, your program officer might call you up and say, we couldn't fund you with this round, resubmit next quarter, and hopefully we'll be able to do something with you. Know your folks. Yeah.
2 questions. Is there a better time of year to apply? I know, like at the beginning of the year every year? I mean, do they like roll over and start it over again? And like if you are not, like if you mess up and they don't accept your application or whatever, can you reapply that year?
Early is good. I mean, it really, I mean, let's be candid here. When I was a grant writer, I would be screeching to the grantor's office at 4:59 on the deadline to find a box of applications because everybody was screeching in. So they don't, start evaluating generally when the applications come in and then evaluate till they run out of money. They generally, it's a board, it's a process. So there's a board or, government agencies like it's the National Council for the Arts who approves grants at the federal level in the arts. And they have these scheduled meetings, right? So as long as you have your application in by the deadline, they're all considered the same at the same time and, yeah.
So just to further clarify, for these specific grants and for most of them, there's application windows. It's not just all year. So there's like,
Yeah.
for USDA, I think it's typically like a 90-day, 60 to 90-day window. And for TILF, I think there's a similar,
Yeah, TILT I think is the 17th of
yeah,
January.
so paying attention to that
Okay.
is
gotcha.
important.
Yeah, so when you read your instructions at the beginning, if the grant's due tomorrow, you're like, if you know you have 2 or 3 months, then you're not in bad shape, okay? Whoops. So this is a sample of a budget form where the categories pretty closely correspond to what I am telling you want to have ready for all of your applications. Okay, so again, your salaries and fringe benefits, be sure to include them, not only because they're expensive, but because you want to show the funder that you're treating your people well. Supplies and materials, fees and travel. And then if indirect is allowed, it's your administration. So your insurance, your bookkeeper, your IT folks. Again, I don't know if these are all applicable, but the folks who are doing things that are important to the agency, the farm, your business, but who don't directly produce your services. Okay.
Could you almost call it like non-revenue generating? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not,
you could.
what you just ain't really going to be bringing in any income.
No, but I would just caution because in a larger organization, marketing is an indirect cost. And marketing is revenue generating. It's like, again, the arts ticket sales, right? But that's a nice way of thinking of it. Yeah. You are not required. Yeah, hi.
So I guess for like the budget, would you consider like doing like what you do for like taxes, like a profit and loss statement?
P&L isn't bad. Yeah, that's well, the thing is that P&L is actuals. It might, because it tells you, looking back, this is what we brought in, this is what we spent, right? A budget is supposed to be a plan. So you might take your categories from your P&L and say, okay, well, I don't know what they might be. Wages. Tell me what some of your P&L categories are for expenses. Machinery,
Yeah, just like
maintenance,
equipment and-
right?
Yeah.
So you can take those categories, but I would, rather than using the numbers that you've done in the past that are already in the bank, in the put to bed, whatever, think, okay, for this project, what do I need to spend on personnel? What do I need to spend on my machinery, my maintenance, my supplies, my whatever you wonderful things you buy to do your business? And that is your budget. Because a budget is a plan going forward. Hi.
Hi. So if it's just when you're thinking about project, you don't need to necessarily include all of your expenses
Nope.
for your business. It's
Nope.
just for the project.
Just
that
for the
you're
project.
proposing.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions online?
Online folks. We don't miss you. I mean, we do miss you. We aren't missing you. I think I've had enough coffee today. Okay.
I have a
Yeah.
for that last night, like, what if somebody like gifted you something or donated you, like, or like even donated their time, like in-kind donations, or that would be revenue?
Contributed revenue. Yeah. These are broad categories. They vary by organization. So if you have a large in-kind contribution, you can break it out and list it. Like I said, these aren't set, these are mine. All right, that's the beauty of budgets. You can use any categories that are appropriate to you. So if you get a lot of in-kind, if you, I don't know, what else? If you have something out that you don't see here, throw it up there. I can't even think of what that might be because, of course, I think mine is perfect, but it's not because obviously I forgot in-kind. Use it the way it works for you, okay? Okay, so just a few kind of words to the wise. This is based on what I see my students make mistakes in the most. Make sure that these sections are aligned. Your project goals and your evaluation, okay? If you say you're going to cut down on your carbon fuel emissions as your goal, and then you report on the number of ears of corn you were able to sell, right? That's no good. You want to report on what you said your goal was. Your project description and your project budget have to work together. They need to line up, right? Because the funder will look at that and they'll say, all right, you said you were going to hire 10 people, but you have 0 in your personnel line. What's the deal, right? Make sure that those guys line up as well so they can see that your plans are reflected in the amount of money you plan to spend. And your sustainability plan, your project revenue, if you plan on doing a crowdfund or using your own cash or something, be sure that's in the revenue part of your budget. Okay, going back. These grants go right here. In government for your USDA, and probably foundation for Tilt, even though they're a nonprofit themselves, right? They're little. So you're gonna put them as revenue there, but say you did crowdfunding, you would add a line here saying crowdfunding or individuals or online fundraising and the amount you expected or hoped to raise. Everybody with me? Now let's say you have not yet done your crowdfunding campaign. You don't be afraid to put it in there. Funders understand that you're doing these budgets way out ahead of what's actually going to happen. You would say crowdfunding campaign, in parentheses, planned or pending, or something to show them that it's a budgeted number, not an actual, because it hasn't happened yet. But it's in your wheelhouse. You're going to be going forward with that to help sustain this project. Okay? All right. I can't believe this, but I think I am almost 2 minutes late. A few more helpful hints. Grant language differs across applications. I've talked about that a little already, right? Your project narrative or your solution or your description all means the same thing, what you plan to do. They might ask about goals or objectives or, metrics, or it goes on and on. They all mean the same thing. What's the change that you want to see? Your budget might be called personnel or staff or wages or employees. Any of the four all mean the same thing. So when you see something on an application, you got to kind of know or ask what the funder's looking for so you know what information to put in there, right? But don't freak out if it's something, if you don't see the exact terminology you expect. If you see project description where you expected to see narrative, you're like, okay, what does this mean, project description? Well, they probably want to know what I'm going to do. Or if you really don't get it, say, I better call them up and see what this means. Outputs versus outcomes, I'm not going there. That's it's nothing that's going to affect you guys. But in short, because I don't want to patronize you, outputs are more numbers based. I produced 1,000 ears of corn. Outcomes are the corn I produced changed the soil to be less acidic and it's going to be more productive next year. That's the change that you want to see, right? But it's not so applicable. And again, budget line items, as you saw already, they aren't going to match they might not match how you do it in your P&L or in your QuickBooks or whatever. Again, you got to take a minute and think about it. Does wages mean personnel, salaries, and employees, or something else? And if you don't think you figured it out, call your funder. Okay, these are the things I see less experienced grant writers freaking out about. Hey, you might sail through it and rock the world, and never mind, Angela. Fabulous, great. You saved yourself a lot of time. Okay, hey, only 5 minutes late. Questions? All right, you're all ready to go out and write your prize winning, yeah.
So we get in the middle of this, can we call you?
Well, that was going to be I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't put a contact slide at the end. Fortunately, Misha was thinking where I was not, and my email address is on this form. I've also got my business cards here and a little brochure about Sanford. For those of you who do work for nonprofits, Sanford provides free fundraising training. So if you do work for a nonprofit and want to take advantage of that, it's free and it's streamed. So you don't have to drive from Puyallup or Auburn to Seattle and find parking. You can sit in front of your computer at lunchtime and watch me do this again. So please help yourself to any of that contact information. I will look at your grants. I will comment on them. I might be mean, but that's because I want you to be the best. So feel free to reach out. And thank you for your attention. I'm glad I was able to come down here and learn some more.
I have it in the schedule to take a little mini break. Do you guys feel like you need to think, use the restroom, grab an empanada? Let's take like 5 to 7 minutes. Circle back up. Got this technology.
Going forward, are the other folks using it?
I want to just get back to the little drive. Yeah.
So then close out my paper.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing super.
Good.
Yeah, I've been visiting every week.
Yeah. It's a Wednesday thing for you, right?
I've got all this other.
Here, man, it's kind of Tuesday.
Go wash up. I like almost didn't make it here at all. Like deep.
Yeah,
Yeah. You're looking for me or Misha?
I guess in one of the.
Thank you. Hope it was helpful.
Oh my gosh.
That's interesting.
Well,
No, it was good. It was just, I mean, honestly, I've never, for our purposes, for each grant,
I
so.
got thrown into the deep end too, so
No,
I'm
you're
glad I'm
hitting
not
the
the only
mark
one.
on some of the things.
All the-
I'm gonna get back to you because then I can engage your question.
People are so shy about that, you know? They're all like, I don't
Oh, big road.
Yeah.
That's the
The name of the file.
I do. I did, well, I Sanford,
To get into
this is what I do.
Okay.
So, yeah, I
That's
do.
the one you could go online and.
You could go online and tune into any of my workshops free of charge. I teach and we also have guest speakers. And I also travel. So like coming down here, this has worked for me. And so if you had someone that you want the board to learn or staff or a presentation on any fundraising topic, I can do that for you for free.
Bananas?
Our patron is very, he's pretty enlightened. He wanted to be able to help the nonprofit sector and that's how we chose to do it, by funding us. and-
Well, I don't actually.
Yeah.
So we have a small nonprofit.
Oh, great, thank you.
Do you ask Alan?
So we try to
I
find.
think it seems to be going okay if we just ask people.
And foods that are culturally relevant to our. We don't have none, so we try to find in sort of. Very small,
I have a
like right now we have Medicaid.
I haven't paid for you, like, been all season long trying to get you.
So those small
Staring at it.
spaces. are awesome.
Yeah.
We have awareness.
Yeah. Anybody else on our website?
But also.
that hasn't brought a plaque?
So we bring a lot of charity and charity everywhere. So we see that as a
Where's it?
way of empowering people.
Remember when I first saw her?
Culture
Yeah, there's a lot of
building back in the
I went
for the common things.
and a lot of, I went to like a 3-hour workshop.
So we're still young, we're trying to
Yeah, you did.
So just knowing that.
Yes, absolutely.
I will reach out to you, absolutely.
And may I add you to my mailing list? Absolutely. Because then you'll
Here?
be notified of the workshops.
In here? I'm Claire.
And if you'd like.
I have Anchorage, and I'm working, I
Are you based in Southern?
We can.
Yeah, I try to keep it Skype or Zoom rather than having to travel. But
Wonderful, we'll reach out. I'll take it forward and then I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
I don't know because I don't know my email.
It's quite different.
I'm gonna say. Thank you very much.
And there is a way, I don't know if there's a way to make you admin without like, switching the screen. But there,
And we are just new farmers, with the freedom.
my desktop, I can monitor.
Yeah, I think we're gonna sure how to post it on.
Did I do it on?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm starting. It's really overwhelming.
I saw you in this, I was like, all right, well, let's make it real.
How are vegetables, livestock, like,
I don't know.
I heard it.
How?
I've been hearing it.
My husband is a lieutenant out in that area.
Different East Pierce. Are you Pierce? I think we are. Oh, that's the three.
No, understood.
There's a lot of districts around there.
Yeah, they.
Yeah.
Well,
So I
it's a city
tried
one,
sending-
and it can be
She
complicated.
didn't, she probably didn't see it. I sent her,
And
yeah.
without,
I sent her a
Without-
message, but I don't know
I
how
don't
it
mean to offend you,
displays.
when these programs happen, you didn't get
Yeah.
that, but it sounds like the answer is no.
Is Honey's Healthy Hive here today?
Sure are, yeah.
They're
So-
Wealth Organics Farm.
Right, well,
Fiddle
so the second
Holiday.
question
I think
then is,
it's-
say, you know,
It's by
I don't want thunder.
having it.
And then it's up to, but.
If I may suggest,
I'm not quite sure, I'm sure they're big.
right,
I've been tracking. I don't know.
do you, are your funding eligible or more likely to?
Like I would make the arrangement.
I'm not encouraging you to go on it, right? I guess what I'm encouraging, the way I looked at it,
This is all.
okay, I had all the public sources, foundations,
It's like very complicated.
are more likely to get to our members. I'm gonna go after one public source and one foundation source for each. We did it. Right, so I can legitimately plug the holes in the budget.
That's not even,
Revenue
no,
budget
you
by
call
saying,
it from
you know,
that.
So, development operations ramping up is a good thing for many reasons. But is that something that might not come coming down the pipe?
Right, but.
And is there, the band, some more grants?
Well, I just.
That aren't.
Yeah.
So you're
That's where we're.
I
I don't think that it's 1.5 acres behind it.
You would, you can
Right.
send it out.
5 acres.
And the problem with that is going back to like, how do you know if they want to?
Or use it for farming.
Some way to make that screen.
If I was, and I like a neighbor by yourself,
Well, that's what I was
I would
just
say
saying,
after
it's like, you can't be.
something like,
Tell
at this point in time, we're applying to you for funding while we ramp up the development efforts, so we have a diverse background. That's what we're, I don't know, I don't know what the hell you might be doing. We're, looking at doing, we're looking at your planning.
That must be
Right, we're planning to start an individual campaign. You know what I'm saying? Because you really are. That's legit, right? Really, all that I found they want to see is that there are efforts being made.
Right.
To
So
not
the
get
one
all
thing
your
being,
eggs in
just
one basket.
remember to.
Does that help? Like, it's a barrier.
It didn't.
Oh, everybody's overworked.
That second.
That was one of the things I wrote a grant on. That means that
Yeah, I'll show you real quick.
It is a slap, but,
No, we're coming.
yeah, well,
Hi, everybody.
So it's just the 3 dots.
Thank you.
coffee here, you can
You know, I imagine a lot of like
Valley is there. That's where I started writing grants in 1990. So,
I mean, I get it.
you bet.
I mean, there's like, yeah. Capability of like, and now we've trained her to get to do actions. And
It's such a big desert.
in the desert, it's really rural. The other thing that, I mean, it sounded so adventurous, but at the same time, I was like, I don't know if that's like the sort of thing that I do.
Finding,
Like, one of the events, like,
our mission.
There it is.
So
It's not starting like that.
We're also trying to find
Great mind.
So we reached out to you. Thank you.
That's right. We have to
Yes. Let's do it. Let's have it.
You bet.
that's my goal for today.
I believe.
Yeah, right. I don't really pick. I don't know what that's kind of where we're at.
I'm sending you the slides if you want to send them out.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yep, in the works.
Anyway, it's just kind of.
So we reached out.
Okay,
more
great.
and say we're close to
I think it's the other way around.
Yeah.
It's like, think you're gonna do one thing.
You know, like, now that I know it's okay with you,
You know.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, I'm going right up there.
Get on it. I totally get that.
Anytime.
We,
Yeah.
That was the other thing. I mean, it was so interesting. And I guess I have Amy working. Yes, you know, but.
I love that. I wish I had a card, but that's okay.
Right.
I love that.
This, I love she's want to make sense out of everyone's meeting, but not all doing the same thing. There's just not that kind of. I guess, but there's more. I only got a handful of the ones that I got a box. I know that USA. Amazing.
Still.
And you get,
Up already.
you get frostbite. So,
They're really
natural swimming. So, in about a year, I would say you're a week and days.
great.
No, so,
Yeah.
player development.
Water there.
Are you guys ready?
We're going.
We have like
All right, if you guys want to make your way back to your seat. I don't have your bio, Jeff. I thought you were elk hunting.
Well, I came back.
Did you strike out?
I did strike out. Carlotta, I'm gonna go over that. I did. I can, if you'd like, I can give
Yeah.
a real brief explanation after.
I'm just gonna tell these people why I have you guys here. So I actually went to a workshop for this Value Added Producers Grant, and the workshop for just this grant was over 3.5 hours long, I think. And I still think we like scratched the surface. So it is a lot of work. It's a hard grant to write, but because we have these wonderful resources, is it like 90% of Washington State applicants got funded last year or something like that? Very high percentage. A really high percentage, and it's not because everyone in Washington is like really great at grant writing, it's because we have really good resources for this. I've already got Carlotta on like whatever speed dial email version is, like I'm already, and it's not even open yet, right? But you can start practicing now and start getting ready now. I plan on applying for this year, so it's going to be a lot of information, but this is just the start of a conversation. Get comfortable. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Well, I'm Carlotta Denisi with USDA Rural Development, and I'm in Olympia, Washington. So I'm the lead for the Value Added program across the state. But generally, I'm working on, well, actually, we work on grant applications throughout the state. This is my coworker Jeff Peterson, and he also works on the value-added producer grant program. We also have like 20 other programs that we share up between specialists, and so there's a lot of other grant programs that we're also working on at the same time. Some he works on that I don't, some I work on that he doesn't, but we both work on value-added producer grants, so we're both a resource to it. It was said that the notice for the value-added program has not been announced yet. We expect that to be announced in a federal register, like soon, anytime, but that could be January, it could be next month, we don't know, but we are expecting a 90-day window. So once it's announced and there's a federal notice, it'll say that your deadline, will be in 90 days from whenever it is announced. We do expect that the application process would stay the same. And so a lot of the information in the PowerPoint will be relevant and probably 100% correct, but there may be changes when the notice comes out. So it's just something to keep note of. Yes.
Do you put the announcement on your website, or do people sign up to be notified, or?
We may have it put on our website, but I'm not in charge of that. So we would ask our public affairs guy to put it on our state website. There is a sign up for getting notices. I'm not sure what that is.
So if you took this handout, and I'll email it to all you at home, the link that's in here, it's a long thing that you would type in, but it'll say when you go in if it's open or not. So you can check in there to see when it's open. And if I hear about it, I'll email everyone who's here to say, like, hey, it's open.
You want to keep checking it.
Yeah.
We have a lot of different programs, and we talk to people over the course of the year all the time, in and out. And we have to put that on y'all just a little bit. We'll try and inform you as best we can through all our resources, but we want you to check the website. That link is going to say whether it's open or not, and the notice will be there.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to launch into the value added. I heard Misha saying that she spent a lot more time with some other speakers and me at value added, and it is a complicated grant. The thing about this grant that is so great is that if you have a project that, let's say, is $500,000 over a course of 3 years, we pay $250,000 of it. That's pretty big. That's big. That's a big grant. So a lot goes into it because taxpayers' money. So when they're reviewed and scored, there's a lot of detail into it. But we'll go through some of the different steps. There's different benchmarks and things like that. So we'll just kind of go through the slides. If you have a question during the slides, just go ahead and raise your hand. Let's just deal with it. Unless it's long and drawn out and detailed, we'll move on from there. Which one is it?
Great question. Maybe I can choose it. Can you guys at home hear Carlotta okay? Now that Alan's gone, it's not going to work. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, so the purpose of the value-added producer grant is it helps ag producers successfully produce, market, and sell value-added products and expand your markets for the ag producers and strengthen rural communities, economies. There's 2 uses of funds. There's planning grants and working capital grants. So at least in Washington State, we see most of our applications under working capital. So planning would be, let's say you have an idea or you're doing it a little bit, but you really need a full feasibility study to really ramp it up and move. So it can pay for feasibility studies, or let's say you've done that but you really just need to fine tune your marketing and your business plan. The planning grant can be used for that. Working capital can be used if you've already got those things into place and you're ready to move and you need the working capital. And we'll go into more detail on the working capital piece of it. But working capital would be, in this case, as we know it now, $250,000 maximum for the grant, and that's for operational expenses. But just right off the bat, it cannot be used for equipment or the production of your ag product, or real estate or buildings. So a lot of times people need to know that right up front. No, nothing can be used for that in this.
What about remodeling a current structure to fall into?
No. So all the funds are used for is post-production, and that would be, it could be for processing, marketing, distribution, sales, all those kind of things that happen post-production, post-grown, whatever.
Post-harvest.
Yeah, post-harvest, thank you.
So can I give an example really quick? So for my farm livestock, I can't use it to buy feed. I can't use it to pay labor for feeding livestock, but I can use it to pay for harvest, slaughter labor, cut and wrap fees, all the packaging, labeling. If I do a delivery, or if I rent a delivery van, or if I pay someone to deliver it, all of those can be paid for.
So everything pre-harvest has to be in place, which, that makes sense, the equipment, your building, all of that.
Correct, and that is, but what we're looking to do is convert a building to a commercial kitchen to them. So we grow produce, and so things like fermented hot sauce and processing peppers or pickling cucumbers, and then, or washed and ready to eat salad greens. All those have to be done in a commercial kitchen. So
this
Kind of
grant
kitchen.
will not, would not be for that at all.
I have a good.
That's a big sticking point. It is a really hard part of this.
I can say that I'm also gonna apply for this grant, and I do have, I take herbs and I put them in a bottle and I make simple syrup. So it's along the same thing, and I use a co-packer. So if anyone is kind of along that line of like, I wanna make hot sauce or something and put it in a bottle, I'm happy to help share some of the resources that I have in doing that. And it's honestly, like, when you're starting, using somebody who already knows all of that, like if you can find a co-packer, to start and launch your product is a good thing, and then all of those kind of follow.
And there could be other resources. I don't want to spend too much more time on that, but there could be other maybe loan resources. We do, within our other 40 programs, we have some revolving loan funds through intermediary lenders that can do small loans into 50,000 microloans. So that's something to just think of.
And Human Links.
And farms.
Human Links offers microloans for farmers, so you can talk to me after about it. We lend up to $2,500, 5 years at a 2% rate.
Oh, that's great.
We'll launch the next program.
Okay, slide 3. But I did want to get that question out of the way because that is sometimes a stickler. Okay, again, I mentioned it's a 50-50 match. So let's say it was a $500,000 project, 250 could be grant. And you can ask for less grant funds, but typically, usually we see a 50-50 match ask. Yes.
So at that 200, so the person would be responsible for the 250. Do you have to have that in the bank?
Those will be further down the road.
Okay.
So this is just a little tickler, and then we'll get to that. So let's talk about applicant eligibility. I'm afraid I won't get through my 40 minutes or whatever. So
Take your time,
make it move. So typically, our applicant eligibility, you have to meet ag producer definition. And so that would be an individual or an entity directly engaged in the production of ag commodity and has the legal right to harvest an ag commodity and is subject to the value-added project. So you have to be farming or ranching and, be ready to go into the value-added projects. Directly engaged means either substantially participation in the labor management and field operations themselves, or by maintaining ownership and financial control of the ag operation. So this kind of is meant for some of the large farms, which years ago we used to do these grants to some, some large corporation, large farms. And I'm kind of happy in the last 10 years or so, we really are meeting a lot of the smaller farms, at least in Washington State.
Do you have to have been in production for a certain amount of time to qualify?
You have to be engaged in farming. I don't think there's a limit.
Like, could you apply it on your first year, for example?
You could if you could show some of the other things for this grant,
Yeah.
So that would be more of a requirement, and we'll talk about that in some of the other slides. For a beginning farmer, which is kind of part of the application process, that is 10 years or less. So applicant types, and this will be more evident when you take a look at the application templates, because you do have to distinguish what type of applicant you are. Independent producer, which I would say almost all of our applicants are independent producers. Ag producer groups, farmer and rancher cooperatives, and majority controlled producer-based businesses, which I don't think we've had any applications.
Most people are all right.
Yeah, the first one. So independent producer is an ag producer or entity that's solely owned and controlled by the ag producers, directly engaged in production of the subject ag commodity. Sole proprietors, partnerships, LLCs and corporations are all, can all qualify under independent producer. And yeah, about 85% of our, I would say higher, are independent producers in Washington, yeah.
For those of you who are taking pictures of the slideshow, I'll probably ask Coletta to email it to me and then I can send it out to you.
And if you wanted, I do have them in here right now if you want to grab a pile up and hand them out. But yeah, I have a bunch of those. Ag producer groups, this would be things like these kind of associations and Washington potatoes, those kind of things. I don't think in Washington, well, we have had a few. I think we've had the wine industry has been successful.
I'd say if you think you fall into those other, kind of those three groups, talk to us about it, and we can talk about eligibility and see where you fit, because, again, that's more the exception than the.
I believe everybody's independent producers.
Probably. Is there anybody in here who may be applying as part of a group, a cooperative, or anything like that?
We can kind of list those. Again, cooperatives. These are some examples of some cooperatives that have received grants. Control, we'll go past that. Another requirement is that applicants must produce and provide more than 50% of the raw commodity that will be used for the value-added product. So I'll use your example, because you contacted me and you said that the herbs and the different things that are going to go into your flavored simple syrups, but you don't produce the sugar and you don't produce water. You just.
And we don't produce the berries, so we buy local berries, but we produce all of the herbs.
But of the product, one of the products that goes into your, because yours is a good example, I had to actually go back and make sure. One of the things that goes into your simple syrup is the herbs. So if you are producing at least 50% of whatever herbs or flavoring that are going in there, then you qualify. But, to me, by the skin of your teeth sort of a thing. You qualify. And I think that's excellent. So, and then you must own it from its raw state through the value-added project. So that means, and I've heard this before, sometimes, let's say meat. They'll send it off, they're actually selling it and rebuying it. That's not going to work. if you send it to a packer, but you retain ownership of that meat, you don't have any other process of buying it back, then you're gonna meet this requirement. So your example of a packer would be all right as long as you're hanging on to that as owner of that product. Okay. And the last thing on the slide there is what I just already pointed out. So, good. Okay. So about those already. So then it moves into, is your product eligible? Your product requirements, it shows added value to your commodity. And there's 5 different methods for showing that, which is going to be another slide. So we'll move to that one. You must show an increase in customer base in your application, even if your customer base right now is 0. So you're projecting, you're planning, and your customer base is starting at 0 and you're going to end in 2 years with 50. That's fine. You have to increase your customer base. So you might have 5 now, whatever, or you may have 200 now, whatever the number is. And then the other requirement is show an increase in revenue realized because of the value-added product that you're working on. Okay, so those are things that you're going to spell out in detail in the application, but those 3 things you'd have to meet. And these are the 5 methodologies. You can meet more than one, but you only have to meet one of these. So whatever your product is, you can meet one or more. So what I will say is that to keep it simpler for the reader and the writer of the grant, if you really can focus on one, that's what you should do. So methodologies to add value. So, simple is the change in physical state. And then there's some more slides that go in a little more detail. So I'll just slip through these and go to the next slides. Produce in a manner that enhances value of the commodity. Product segregation. Farm ranch renewable energy, which I would say we rarely use that under the value added because we have a renewable energy for America program that I can talk about briefly at the end. And then locally produced, marketed, and distributed. So I would say almost all of our applications come in with this methodology because you can show that people pay more for local, local foods and local products. And if you can explain that, that's the easiest way. If you are doing one of the other methodologies, change in physical state, and that, of course, is something like milk into cheese or even wool into clothing, meat into packaged meat, you can do that. This one, produced in a manner that enhances value. This is a recognized set of production practices when growing the commodity. A different market is created for the resulting project, increased value for non-standard production versus standard. And an example would be, if you're growing organic. So it's pretty easy to prove that people pay more for organic. Free-range chickens, you're going to be able to sell your free-range eggs or meat, for that matter, more than your standard chicken production, or what the other examples are there.
All right, guys, hang on. gonna check in with all of you at home. Do you have any questions real quick? Anyone still there?
Product segregation. This is when a commodity is separated from other varieties of the same commodity and continues from production through processing and marketing. An example would be GMO versus non-GMO. And then the other one was I missed the enhanced production. I think this is one that you were aiming at, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'm not sure yet because I qualify like first at least 3 of them, and I know that some people do try to, they think like the more the better, but really that's just very complicated. So pick one. And I haven't decided if I'm going to do like grass-fed or pasture-raised or just the local. The local one seems like the low-hanging fruit that pretty much everyone in this room qualifies for, because unless you're shipping everything internationally, nationally, or whatever, we're all selling locally. So.
Yeah, so that's going to be depending on your project, what you pick. So an example, the reason why we bring this up about which one you want to pick and which one you focus on, I did have an applicant. It was kind of a complicated application, and they hit like 3 of them. And so they had to go into detail to prove all 3 of them, you know, really for just to prove their methodology. And it was a lot of extra work where they could have picked 1 or maybe even 2, which was important to them. So that's just something to think of.
There's no like extra points for that, right?
There's no extra points, and there's not like a certain pool of funding just for locally produced, or just for this, or extra money for, the one that organic would fall into, which would be enhanced in enhanced production. So, it's something to think about when you start looking at it. Yeah.
So what would the differences then be in produced in manner that enhances value and product segregation? Could the organic be the same thing all the way to marketing and sales? Organic, so how would you just know which way you want to go with that?
Well, I mean, there's a fine line there. I don't.
I think it depends on how you find your marketing is going to be. So, if you're filling out this application, you're going to have a plan. You're going to spend your money on marketing because that's mostly what this grant is for. So, if you're wanting to identify your product as organically grown, that's the one you're going to fit on. You know what I mean? If that's really what you're doing, if you're trying to make sure you're doing the right one, I think that'll be less problem than when you define what you're doing. If Misha decides, I want people to buy my meat because it is grass-fed, then she may pick the enhanced value one.
I'm going to pick whatever one seems the easiest to explain on paper, honestly.
I have heard of wheat farmers sending to a mill, but the mill itself wasn't organic, but the wheat was grown organic. And because at the mill, that's where they're turning it into a value-added product, that separates the different level of organics. It looks like we have one for the processing facility. That's through processing to market is what that says. And then we had the organically grown part of like the physical plant. That seems to me this distinction.
The commodity is all the same, or it changes afterwards, or it changes in the process.
Right, and maybe the mill takes multiple farms.
Yeah.
And each farm is organic, and then if you can prove that, you can be an organic processing facility. But maybe you have organic Tuesdays and non-organic Wednesday, I don't know.
I think the example for this one that made the most sense to me is we had a dairy farmer that had got the grant, and he's in the past, and he's reapplying again, and he's going to use this one because they have A1A, whatever, milk. Somebody correct me. Yeah, and then A1A2, and they're going to do 2 separate product lines with the 2 different protein types of milk, and they're gonna sell them marketed that way. And so that's a segregation of his product into 2 different channels.
On the same farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good step. Yeah.
I think most of us are probably, this is complicated. Most of us aren't doing that.
And it is for us too, because we're not seeing all of these types all the time. We usually are seeing the straightforward ones.
And Carlotta, are you guys, you and Jeff, are you reading the applications and then grading them? So yeah, these are your friends,
We're
guys.
talk about that when we get to scoring, but if you're talking to me ahead of time, like I'm talking with these 2 farmers, then if you get your application into me before the deadline, after the window opens, then I can, look at it, critique it, see if it's as complete as possible. Not saying it's going to guarantee it's going to pass when it goes out of our state, but we do score them within our state, with 6 employees, and then we send it up to our national office, and they compete nationally. So it is important, this grant is important that it's written well, not that it just impresses me or the other 5 in our state, but when it gets up to the national office, it's going to be sent to independent scorers, and they've got hundreds of them. They need to understand your application, they need to understand your numbers, your projections, and all that kind of thing. So what you get locally from us is a chance to, swing it through us and let us take a look at it. And sometimes, honestly, I'm not sure I understand what they're saying. Well, if I don't, the next person probably isn't either, So sometimes keeping it as simple as you can and making your point, that's going to be what you're going to want to do.
Get started as early as you can, though. And this, the person that presented before us that talked about the relationship thing, those are all great points, but in this scenario, I can tell you, when the clock strikes end of grant application, relationship has kind of ended, because these get sent off, like Carlotta says, to Washington DC, and they don't. It's a piece of paper that has to stand on its own. Prior to that, we can help you. Maybe it becomes more difficult the day before or something like that, because we may get a bunch, but. Just keep that in mind. If you're stuck on something that might have something to do with the matters of eligibility, that is a kind of a big deal, talk to us beforehand so we can kind of weed that out and you get on your way and start writing the dang thing, because there's a lot to do.
That's right.
What percentage do you push forward?
Pardon me?
What percentage of the grant application that you get to push forward to national level?
I think that last year we received about
I would
30
say,
of them, and
yeah.
I think only 4 or 5 just either were less than that. There was only a few.
if it's
that were
ineligible,
not eligible.
we can't push it forward. I don't know if is there a scoring minimum?
There is a scoring minimum,
That keeps them
and it's
back.
like 60 maybe. So there was some, I was like, I don't know if I can I don't even know if I can score this that high, but we did, and it made it through. It did. So it's also a little bit subjective. So my scoring may differ from his. We found that once we averaged out in our state, they came back and were like, wow, the national, scoring, they scored it higher or way lower. I mean, it can change a lot. And I'm going to touch on that, how the scoring works, because it's a real important component of it, because as you're writing it, the things that the gal that was talking about before are important, but what's really going to be important is how that thing is scored. That's how you're going to compete, because you're competing not only with those, you're competing with the whole nation, not just your own state. So we'll send them all forward if they meet the minimum scoring we believe in, and we believe they're eligible. So, yes.
So generally speaking, is this program money for existing businesses to launch new enterprises? Is that what we're looking at?
I think that's common.
It's going to be both, and there's some slides that talk about emerging product, and what's the other one? It'll come up with in the slides, so we'll go through that.
Okay.
Like in my case, no, and I think that's what's so
That's what
appealing
I'm
about
wondering,
it.
because you have your certifications that you're happy with, right?
Yeah, but it's just, it's funding to help me expand my market share, right? So I'm at a point where I need capital to grow, and this grant can help with that on certain expenses.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of the things that made it really appealing to me, is that you don't have to just start a brand new enterprise at your farm. It can help pay for things you're already doing.
Yeah, you're growing what you're already doing, just expanding. Okay, that's helpful.
And we'll get into some of those slides too. So I think we already had this slide, planning or working capital. And I didn't mention that years ago, we used to see a lot of planning grants, and then the following year, we would see the working capital grant. So that was the kind of the idea behind this. These days, we seem to be seeing mostly all working capital and not planning, but it's just something to think about. You're not limited. Once you get a planning, you can get a working capital the next year. You can get another working capital the next year. So you're not limited by the number of grants year by year. So eligible expenses is processing, labor, even utilities, your ingredients, packaging, labeling. So even though we don't allow for equipment, some of the smaller, like the labeling and packaging equipment can be included, and I think it might be $1 figure.
And follow this guide very closely, because if there are ineligible costs in there, it could disqualify you from the grant. If you have a question about whether it's an ineligible cost, you want to make sure we get that vetted out beforehand.
You can, so let's say you are producing, I don't know, 55% of what you think you're going to need for the product. You can purchase additional raw commodity, elsewhere to add into your project, as long as it's less than 50%. Advertising, promotion, web development, financial accounting costs, distribution, shipping, delivery, all those things. And you mentioned one that's not on here, but leasing.
Or the co-pack. I was talking to a grant writer about this, and similar to the previous presentation when we talked about a project. So her feedback was, think about a project that you want to propose, and then in that case, think about the eligible expenses that would go into that project. So you said most of yours, or a lot of them, are marketing, some sort of marketing projects, which the grant writer also said that a lot of the ones that she's written have been marketing projects. So then would most of the expenses that you're, budgeting for would be related to marketing projects. Does that make sense?
With this, your project may have, let's just make it simple, 3 components, 3 major components, let's say. And this is usually what we see. For processing, so you're paying personnel to process, and then marketing, and then distribution. So I mean, those would be just, it's on almost all of them. So it doesn't have to be all one. In fact, I suppose if the numbers came out, you wouldn't, maybe it would be all processing, but it almost always has to do with marketing, because that's where you can't get money. You can't get money from a bank to market your product, and usually not processing. Whereas back to the equipment thing, there is money available, you can get hard costs. But this is all soft costs, so this depends on your project, how it's going to break out, what you're going to ask for, what's going to be included in the total project. So to get your your herbs or your meat off your farm, it's going to take all those things.
Okay, so most people do look at it more holistically in terms of.
I think you have to, because it's your whole products. It's your whole value-added product. It takes all those things to get it off your farm, realize value, increase customers. I mean, how are you gonna do that without marketing? So
Can I ask it in a different way? So let's say you already have the money somehow to do all your processing. You just want to raise funds for the marketing part of that project. Can you only apply and
Yes.
ask for that?
Yes.
Is that? No.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if you needed to ask for the whole
You might as well.
thing, then you could do that as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Carlotta, are we gonna talk about a lower, the lower working capital type of application?
Yes, those are the
Okay,
slides.
because that might be where you decide to do more or less as to what you build. I'll shut
Yeah.
up. It's coming, it's really exciting.
It is very exciting. And it's hard to deliver, honestly. You stand up here, it's hard to deliver.
You're doing great.
When the people that
Because
deliver
your
the
head is moving
programs tell you
forward.
it's the most complicated one that we work with. It's as complicated for us as it is for you. But it's well worth it. I've been in ag financing for a lot of years before I was in this role, and this is a great product.
It
So
really is.
it's
If
worth the
you
effort.
can, get through this piece of it, and as this stuff percolates in this, simple PowerPoint, you'll have questions, but we can go through it step by step. So
An example of a marketing cost that you might not think of, this dairy farmer, he bought a van with his own money, but then he wrapped that van with his logo, cows and really beautiful logo imagery that I never would have thought of, but marketing costs, right?
yeah, it's awesome, and that wrapping really doesn't cost that much compared to, you're not cleaning it, things like that. So we talked about some ineligible expenses already, and really it has to do with anything, construction equipment, vehicles, those kind of things. And back to the vehicles, it can pay, however, for leasing. So if you're leasing a vehicle for some reason or another, either to deliver or whatever, that could be an eligible cost.
So, I got the impression on the last slide that delivery would be covered, but then delivery of commodities is not, what's the, where's the line on that?
Raw commodity, right?
Yeah, I think, that's not delivery of commodity.
So Denise can't use it to pay for getting the berries to her farm, but she
That's
can
what I was
use it to
thinking.
distribute the bottled syrup.
If I was thinking it would, if you had to purchase some other commodity, the less than 50%, and get it to your farm, that would not be.
So way back in the beginning, you mentioned it was a one-on-one match.
Can you speak up for the people at home?
So I was thinking about, one of her first slides said it was a one-on-one match. So that means say I was applying for a $5,000 project from this program. I would need to also show that some other funding source has contributed that much already as well, the same amount. So what if the match funding source, what if that funding covered all expenses that were ineligible for this program? Would that make a difference at all?
So, I'm going to talk about matching now, but matching funds cannot be used for any ineligible costs.
Okay, that's my question. Okay, thank you.
So I'll talk about matching, and that gets very confusing too, so I'll just try to step through it. Okay, so we're at 50%, project costs. And you can only spend it on eligible expenses. This is matching. This would be matching, and grant funds are really the same on that point. And you can't spend match in advance of drawing, never mind that one, that one's not even right. No conflict of interest. And conflict of interest in an easy term is, let's say you were paying a co-packer, but it's your dad that owns the company. That's a conflict of interest. That's simple, and it's come up. We had a really good one that was turned down because it was pretty much like that the father owned another part of the whole farm, and they were kind of paying themselves with grant funds. You can't do that. So that's what conflict is. a little bit. If you have any question, we can delve into it because that's another complicated issue. But it'd be father, any family-related person, that kind of thing. And then matching, I heard the other grant writer talking about this. In this case, you are verifying your matching funds at the time you make the application. And so the matching funds can be any of these sources. So it can be cash you have in the bank, a loan. So sometimes there are loans that are made to match it from different organizations, maybe even banks. You don't see that too often, but some of the larger projects sometimes. The value of your commodity. So this is a big one because it's not cash or loan or anything. So you can use your own commodity as part of the match of the grant.
That's really awesome, you guys.
Yeah. So would the value be in its raw ag form or its value added form?
The raw commodity. And then you would show that as you're explaining it. It's all right.
That's a great question.
Don't.
And it's a tricky one, right? Because like I don't know how to value my chickens raw, running around like alive. Like that's hard to figure out. But it's still nice, better than me having to come up with capital, right?
Yes.
So for the example of your chickens, do you just look at like market value then? Like if you were to go to the store and buy?
Kind of trying to figure that out. Okay. So I don't have the same, like, right. You don't just get what I have at the store, right? So we're working, this is why she's on speed dial.
All right. So there may be more than one right answer to some of these questions. You know what I mean? It's going to really depend on your project itself when you're talking to us, and we can kind of work that out. So yes, this is a big deal, but it's also complicated because every time later when you're asking for money back, it's a reimbursement grant, you have to make sure you're keeping super good records because you have to show us that you have provided a certain amount of raw commodity because you said up front, I'm going to provide 60% of the raw commodity, and I want to use that 60% in my match. You're going to have to prove that you did, because that's match. So just another thing is, after the grant's made, you do have to document all that. Another thing is applicant or family in-kind contributions. So, and this is limited to 25% of the project cost. And this is important. So we've had this mistake made by a lot of applicants. So let's say you are going to be processing your chickens or your meat. Only up to 25% of your whole project. So
my like hourly labor can be applied
as an in-kind match. So the value of her work, which is documented because you would pay somebody else if it wasn't you would count that as in-kind. Okay, and then there's so we'll give a little example to try to bring the numbers together. And maybe you have an example because you've probably been. Okay. Third party cash. This could be interested benefactor. I don't know that would contribute. So I've seen it where it's been, an in-law or parent that has said, "I'm going to pledge this amount of money to this project." And it's not a loan. It's just that kind of pledge. And then there's third party in-kind contribution also. So that could. I'm trying to think of an instance of third party.
It lets you use their facility and it has a lease value of this or something like that.
That would be good. Or there's also some organizations like TILP or somebody that may contribute their professional assistance to the project in some way, or some organization. They may pledge their third party income. So it can be made of a lot of things, but do remember cash, hate to say it, but cash is king. And when it comes to scoring, and I'll be showing you a little bit of the scoring, cash is worth more in the scoring department. So in match, there's I think it's worth 25 points. Cash is worth the most, and then it breaks it down from there. So that's something to consider too. If you're just trying to get the lowest cash contribution and you have to, well, then you have to do what you have to.
Does a loan count as cash?
Yes.
So the example that I think, again, might be this dairy, one of them, was they had a guarantee on a loan if they were given the grant. So they didn't actually get the loan in advance of the grant, but there was a guarantee that the loan would go through if they got the grant, and that counted as a match.
Yeah, the loan commitment. So, yeah.
You'd be farming still?
I have a question with in-kind. Does that also count, like, can you split up, so for example, I have people who are invested in the farm just personally, and so they give me discount on their services, but like they wouldn't normally. So like photographer, for example, she'll give me a photo session at a discount of what she would normally give me because she's donating kind of the rest of that. Have you ever had that? I'd be like, well, you can pay this, and then I'm gonna donate the other 50%.
I think I did have one last year that was like that. They were going to use a commercial kitchen space, process their thing. And they generally charge, I don't know, however much per month. And they were going to allow, like half that price, or it was way lower. And I think we allowed it as an in-kind. But I would make a little mark and verify that with me. But I think so. It has to be pretty obvious.
It does sound familiar.
Yeah.
A little bit to me too. Yeah, I looked at that one too.
But let's make sure first, because I think
Obviously,
we
something
allowed
like
it.
that, you'd want to document what the standard rate was. You know,
Yeah.
The burden of a lot of this stuff is kind of a
But, you know, coming up with the matching fund is important. That's why you want to do your project with as little money as you can to get it, get it going. So matching is important. So I would say, just remember that when the time comes, it all seems like it's just a mess in your head, you can always give us a call or we can go through this and straighten it out.
Maybe like 15 minutes? Is that enough? I want to let human links and
Yeah. I think, and so then, we'll whiz through these, and then I want to talk about the scoring and the templates briefly. So the application types, and so there's three, there's the planning, and I'm just going to jump to the working capital. We have simplified application, which, it might be simplified, but it's not simple. So, and then there's either market expansion or emerging market. Okay, so here's the breakdown. So grant requests that are less than 50,000. All applicant types, like you're an independent producer, that's are eligible. This one would not require you to submit a feasibility study or a business plan.
You should have a business plan.
But you should have a business plan so that you can demonstrate in your application what you're trying to do, your customer expansion and your revenue increase, and really what your general marketing is. So even though you don't have an official third party one to do, and so a lot of times people are getting their feet wet by doing this one because they don't have a feasibility study, which costs money to do, and that includes the financial, the marketing, the management, all those kind of things that go into a feasibility study. So simplified is this, 50,000 is less than 50,000, so it's got to be 49.9. We see a lot of those, so.
We see a lot of these too.
Don't go 999, please. 49.9. Okay, so emerging markets, these are grant requests that are 50,000 or more. All the applicant types are eligible, and this is where you are producing and or marketing your value-added product for less than 2 years at the time of application. So that you would be saying emerging markets when you're checking the box on the templates.
So somebody here said first time, first year. Is this the only one that that person could apply for?
Yes, definitely. So in this one, emerging, when this is 50,000 and more, independent feasibility study and a business plan are required. So definitely you can see the dollar figure. If you are only thinking it's going to be a $75,000 project, maybe you should scale it back and go to 50, or do the larger. So it's all about scaling when it comes to these benchmarks for what level you're asking for, because are you going to be ready to have an independent third-party feasibility study done or business plan? And just briefly on that, there are organizations that can help you with that, like Northwest Ag Business Center, potentially up in Mount Vernon, depending on your project. And there's WSU, Washington State University, gets involved in feasibility studies and things like that. So those are something important to think about, because you can't submit it if it says you can't. Yes.
So the third point there says that you need to have been marketing value-added products, so not just farming, but you have to be producing this value-added product for 2 years before you can do this grant.
Are you selling product?
Selling product, but not value-added
It's
product.
value added if you've harvested, washed it, bagged it, tagged it.
Okay, but does washing mean, like, what are we talking about washing? Is that like?
Are you
ready to eat?
wholesaling or are you selling, like, what are you producing?
I do both. It's mixed vegetables, mostly what we're selling, but it's, washed out of the garden, but it's not sold as ready to eat, right? Because it's not.
It's still a value-added product, right?
Is it a
It is,
value-added
if you're
product?
just selling it as a locally grown and sold, then you're still hitting.
It's still value-added?
Yeah, they use that term differently for this.
Yes, yes, it's the way that the USDA uses value-added is different from a lot of other organizations.
It's
to our benefit.
Yeah, I think it's different than our organic certification.
There's a reason why I'm having this workshop, because I think a lot of us don't know that. We automatically assume we have to be doing what Denise is doing with simple syrups, and we don't.
Yeah, think about commodity more in like a Eastern Washington big truck pulls up and you dump potatoes into the back of the truck. That's more of a commodity market where you're worried about trade and prices of commodities. And if you have never been on some of those WSDAs and you're worried about like what the commodity price of potatoes is, you're probably already doing value-added product and just don't know it in the terms of WN3 US.
Does that make sense?
It's value-added because we're selling it locally?
Yes. If that's what you're doing, and which sounds like you probably are.
Because it's a national program.
And
so think
also
about, like,
locally, it's
Wisconsin.
400 miles or within the state.
I mean, like I said, every single person in this room can apply just on the basis of growing and selling local produce. It's that easy. I mean, it's not easy, but that's the simplest version.
So that was emerging, less than 2 years, over 50,000. Market expansion is over 50,000, but you have been doing this for at least 2 years, so over 2 years. Okay. And this one does not require the feasibility study, but must submit a business or marketing plan with the application. So let's say this was you and you've been doing something for over 2 years, but under this one is you want over 50,000 and you don't have to have an independent feasibility study. You've already been doing it over 2 years, so you're showing some financials, right? But you still have to have a business or marketing plan, and it does have to be in its own, its own format, its own report, that way. Even though you're building some of the information into the application write-up, you would have these two separate reports that would be required.
And this is the amount, so I think it's up to 3 years, right? So it's the total grant request, even if you're applying for like 3 years, that would be broken out. So if I'm applying for $100,000, but I want to split it into 2 years, 50 and 50, this would be $100,000 for that grant application. Right? Like I would still fall under this category. My grant request is for $100,000, even if I want it into 2 years, right?
Right.
Okay.
The whole project.
And it's up to 3 years, is that right?
That you can spend money and
Mm-hmm.
do
Right.
the outcomes. You
Right.
have 3 years.
I think there's some benchmarks on whether it can only be 2 years or 3.
Do you select that when you apply? How you want it distributed?
You will, because your whole project will be spelled out by you, how you will spend. And I'm just gonna go with the 500,000. How are you gonna spend? Now, let's say it was only a 50,000, it was just a small one. Well, you're probably only gonna take, yeah, I would say do a 2-year. It's not gonna take you 3 years for that. So it's scaled depending on what the project is. And you're gonna say it in your write-up in the application, because that's your business plan. Okay, I'll just go through this real quickly. Basically, the application contents you're going to use are application templates that are available online. And I won't have time to go through that, but if you click on that same website that what was her name?
Angela.
Angela. If she clicked on, you would find the templates in there. So this is back to back, and this is how they did this. So some of this you're just going to, those are all like checking boxes, some of those things that we talked about. But then it'll get into room for writing your narrative and all that. So this is your template. And then all the other forms that go along with it, including that budget that she kind of showed you. The budget will follow what you've written up in here. Time frames, all those kind of things are going to be built into the template. And I think, are the tables in there, Jeff?
Yes, and I can't emphasize enough. When you fill out this template, there are things there that may appear to be repetitive, maybe in this section, and you may also see it over. Do not assume because the person saw it in this section that they're going to remember it in another section. Write it again, do whatever, even if it sounds exactly the same. You may have people scoring different parts of this, and if one person is scoring this and you just assume that they read it from the first part, you're gonna mess up there and not get the points that if somebody had read it holistically, the whole thing. So
yes,
be sure to do that.
And again, I don't have time to go through the whole template, but we talked about your tasks and the budget items. There's actually tables built in. I know you can't see exactly what I'm talking about, but they are there, so you don't have to create the format from scratch. I mean, there is some help here and give you some, kind of some framework to go with. Also talks about how you're breaking down the matching funds. And this can get complicated, but the earlier you got started on what your project is, the better. So this is a hard copy, but they're online too. You can feel free to grab one of those if you like.
Just like in school, your story problems show your work. How did you derive that number? You want to show that. If we're questioning that figure, or somebody is in Washington, D.C. or somewhere part of the country, they're not going to be able to ask you. So.
And the other thing about the templates, if you're careful, this is what I would recommend, is read through the whole template. And in asterisks above each area that they want you to identify, and it's going to tell you what we really want to hear. I mean, what is it that we're trying to get at? What do we want to know here? And again, it may repeat itself. But try to stick to what we're asking for and try to answer it in the order that the templates are, and also using some of the same language. It might be different language for you as a farmer or if you're a professional or some kind of a larger corporation. The wording may be different, but you're going to know what we want to know and use our wording basically. Because we have to read it over and over and over. We want to see that that's what you're talking about, is what we want to read. So some of the stuff, if you go through, it can be overwhelming to go through this, but I just recommend go read it through a couple times and look at what it's asking you for. Then later it's going to go through your mind, where am I going to put all this stuff? and what places, you know, do you need to expound on and describe, you know, more thoroughly. But this is what we're gonna score your application on. So we have the forms and we have all that stuff. As long as those are pretty much filled out, signed, that's all right. But the templates, that's what we're gonna score your application on. So that's the content that is very important. As far as scoring goes,
So for the folks at home, is there a slide that that does scoring?
there is not a slide on this one for the scoring.
The scoring will be, when the notice does come out, it will describe that very specifically. It probably won't change, we don't know.
So the old one's
that
on the
much for
website?
old one. That's a great guide, if you can just pull up the last notice. Is it in the template? I don't know if it.
It's not in the template, it's not in the template. But this is what the register is gonna look like. The scoring is in it.
So for everyone at home, if anyone is still listening, I think these are documents.
Yeah, there is a slide on the scoring. Click it.
These are documents you can find on the USDA's website that I can send a link for.
Where's your clicker there? Page 19 has, yeah, she's pointed out, does have the scoring.
Yeah. So this is sort of a simple version. And you would find that in the notice, and it looks like this. Really fun to read. This was last year's. But we also have just a handout that this helps us to score it. You're welcome to grab one of these or get it emailed to you. And so this will be able to, when, like for instance, nature of the project. So this is worth 30 points. This is your chance to get 30 points. And you're going to address technical feasibility, operational efficiency, profitability, and sustainability. And on this handout that we have that's not online, it actually shows us how to help us break down if you're meeting all that. So to me, this is an important handout to have. You'll find this when it comes out in the notice. This might be easier to follow.
Will you email that to me? Yes. I'll just disseminate.
This particular section too, where Carlotta was talking about using the same words that they have in the template, makes it, for somebody scoring it, if you use those words and then fill in the blank, I will tell you, makes it easier for us to score instead of just being blown away by volumes and volumes. You just, you know, you've seen a million of these. Help us find the answer in there. And that, I know it helps me. I'm not really bright, so I need to have it right in front of me.
And so back to the scoring, which is just so important. So here it says the nature, that's worth 30 points. That's a lot. So qualifications of personnel, seems easy, but we really want to know who's doing what and why are they qualified. And if that means having a synopsis of a resume, real short but to the point. And it talks about, I think, for instance, in here, it kind of talks about experience. So, you know, the years of experience, the experience in doing that exact thing, whatever it is, whether it's the in-kind thing or the processing even, that's important. So even though it might seem kind of obvious, you know, oh well, whatever, they're qualified because they can do that. Just put as much as you can. This will break it down a little bit, and get the 20 points if you can, instead of we're like, oh well, I guess they're qualified, and we give you 5. You want 20 if you can get 20 points. Even if you have a simple project, you're still going to garner these points, even if it's a very simple project, even compared to the $500,000 project. So don't think that the scoring is not important, because it's the only thing that's in the end that's going to be important. But if you can dress everything in scoring, you're going to have a full, complete application. And then commitments and support. And so that includes cash matching. That includes other commitments like your buyers. You might have store commitments, or you might have other end user agreements, suppliers, those kind of things. So anything that would show that the project is going to be strong, that you're going to have the support around you, not just you saying, oh, I'm going to do this and get that done. But when you have proof and they're giving you letters and that specifically talks about the product, you want them to be specific too, so you can get points because that's worth another 10 points.
The quality of those is so important. And you, if any of you that's been involved with grants before, and maybe a lot of you haven't, you may have to help with those. If you've got somebody that you know is going to be, wants to buy this stuff, you may be, helping them put that letter together, because they don't know what they'll say whatever you want, but just have them say, boy, this is a great idea. That doesn't carry a lot of weight in terms of points. Help them with the process. It's new for them too. And you may not be able to get them to be very specific. Do the best you can with that, within reason.
I have a question. So are you saying that for the one-to-one match, if you have commitment from an end user to buy the product,
that won't be
that
matched?
won't be matched? Okay.
Yeah, I know it's hard.
Just wanted to check.
This would be scoring.
Gotcha.
So scoring is kind of, after you put everything together in your application, we're going to score it. But end users and things like that, buyers of your product, those are going to just when we're scoring it, are going to
If
show.
you produce this fancy syrup, I can foresee us, purchasing X amount.
And it's not a
In a
guarantee.
perfect world.
Not a
It's not a
contract.
guarantee.
It's just a letter of support. And an example you guys gave, I think, was like, for me, like, maybe I have one of my good customers, or maybe somebody at PCC Farmland Trust that I have a relationship with supports me. And it just shows that I am not farming in a vacuum, like I have other supporting agencies or organizations or people around me to help propel me.
Exactly. So, we can talk about that if you get into it, but it is important. That's worth 10 points. And then the work plan and budget, which is kind of what I was holding up here and said there are templates in there, that you can work from. That's worth 20 points. So we have to understand what the whole budget's going to look like. Very detailed. That's probably where you're going to spend the most work, don't you think? With the budget and the work plan, which means all the tasks it's going to take to get you through that 2-year or 3-year process. So that's worth 20 points.
Make sure the math lines up. You don't have it on one page, say, my project is going to be this, and you get to the end and it's something else. We see that, and that doesn't go well sometimes when it goes elsewhere.
Yeah. And then priority points, this is based on last year's, but generally there's extra points added by the administrator of the agency, not within our state, for beginning farmer, socially disadvantaged veteran, or small medium farm. And those are check marks in the beginning of the template, so you don't have to worry about.
And most of us
that,
probably qualify for at least one of those based on the size of the farm, or if you've been farming less than 10 years. We only have a few minutes left. I know this is like really heavy and dense.
Well, I did try to jam all that
Yeah, I
in
know.
here.
So I was gonna say, I think, right, this funding is gonna happen again next year, and next year you'll have another 3
Well,
to
the
4
last
hours
couple
or so.
years it's been on a 2-year cycle. Previous to that, it used to be on a 1-year cycle. I don't know if that means it's going to continue, or just the change in the administration, the change in the program, and different things like that. But this will be the 3rd time it's been on a 2-year cycle. So.
Okay, so I was gonna say, you can apply next year if you're panicking, but maybe don't, just apply. Just apply this year.
It's good practice.
I'm gonna give you guys at home, if you can hear me, a chance to ask some questions really quick before we switch gears to our last presenters. You have to unmute yourselves. Is anyone still there? I disconnected them somehow, I didn't realize it.
So I'm just going to recap a little bit. The template is where you start. You're going to go through all those things that we did on the slides. Get independent, what's your methodology, what size grant, what you're going to need to apply for that. It's all, it'll kind of line out in the template. the template itself, the additional forms. The other thing back to what Angela said was the DUNS number. You have to have the DUNS number in order to apply for System for Award Management, or SAM. It's kind of supposed to be like Uncle Sam. And so every federal grant has to have their entity, their individual, or their organization signed up through SAM. So you have to have the free DUNS number first to apply for the SAM. The SAM is also free. On our website is a clean link where you will not get somebody trying to pay you $500, because that happens. And we've had people pay it and it's gotten the job done, but you can do it for free. When you do the System for Award Management, just be ready with all your banking information, your tax information, and have some time and some quiet to get through the system. It's not real user-friendly. Have you done it, Misha?
I have,
Okay,
yes.
so it's not super
takes some
user-friendly.
Yeah.
You just have to go through it carefully, and then you wait, I don't know, a few days or a week, tells you to do something else. You go in there about 3 different times over the course of a couple weeks,
And
probably.
it's government, so it's like not efficient, and they ask
But
weird
it's
questions.
required. But it's free. And then, so then you have your template, and then you will
We
have
resemble that
the,
one.
and then when you're doing the template, you want to also read through this federal notice when it comes out. And it does look like this, and it's like, it's difficult to read, it's 3 columns, all that. It's all in here. And then to simplify just for the scoring, which is in here, you can take this as a handout, it's not online. So there it is. Not simple, but if you are awarded, I mean, the money makes all the difference. And, the last session we had 2 successful completed project owners, and they really, I mean, it's true. They've gotten all that money to get their product out there and get it going. And it's not easy, but we could have fun.
And one way to think of it, like, so I know a lot of us are interested in capital expenditure, like we need equipment. Well, this won't cover that, but this might free up some of your working capital so that you can then buy equipment that otherwise you would be spending on labor or marketing, things like, or whatever. So it's just a different way of thinking about it.
Provided other resources that would help them assist with this, an ABC, that kind of thing. You want to talk about that?
Northwest Ag Business Center in Mount Vernon can assist with some types of ag business and feasibilities. I would just say you could go to their website, Northwest Agriculture Business Center. Mount
They
Vernon.
also have a program where you can pay them to help you go through the grant writing.
I think they do. They have some grant assistance with that. And it seemed really reasonable. I remember Jeff Bolts mentioning something like, I don't want to say a number,
Yeah.
but it seemed pretty reasonable. And then there are other grant writers like Brian Christie has written them in the past, and Eliason Consulting.
Like paying someone to do it for you doesn't mean that you're gonna get the grant. Just
And they can't pay for the grant.
It can't be included in the cost of the
That's not well.
grant. But it's an idea, and some people have done that and been successful. And I did mention some other, revolving loan funds if you had project-related costs that you might be able to go through our agency. And then one last thing is our renewable energy program, real quick. Completely simple application compared to this. In fact, Nick, that was in here earlier with the Conservation District, can help do, so let's say you want a solar, or you want to do energy efficiency improvements on your farm, this grant can cover 25% of those project costs. And it's none of this kind of stuff, it's just regular forms. So if you're interested in that at all, you can go ahead and grab that.
Carlotta's email is on the handout that I provided, but I think it might have cards as well. Definitely ask her, that's what she's here for. She said she gets paid to help us do this. So I want her to know all of you as well as she knows me.
Well, and, just on a personal level, I like what I do, so I don't get bonuses, I don't do anything. But it makes me happy to be able to help people, and it's easier on a one-on-one than it is with 20 people and going through this, because it is complicated. But we have to put forth sort of what it takes to apply, and then you can take it from there. So whether you're ready this year or next year or the year after, I think this program's here to stay. It's funded under the Farm Bill, and those are funded on 4-year basis.
If they do it timely.
Yeah.
And it
So-
gets passed this year, right?
Yeah.
So we're good for a little while.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I think I disconnected everybody. You guys want to come on up? So I have Erin Murphy is from Till. Nancy is going to do me. So this is a grant that I got, and I got the full amount. Which is awesome, but also I can't apply for 3 more years. So I don't know. You guys can tell me whatever. Just take it away.
Okay, so here, my name's Erin. I'm the statewide education coordinator for Historical Alliance.
And I'm Nancy Escudis. I work with Human Rights Foundation. I'm the Special Projects Director. So we work together for this grant. This is our 3rd year, I think, that we're doing it. So.
Yeah, so I printed out a few applications that I think got passed down earlier. It's all posted online as well on both the school website and then the Human Rights website. We were looking at our website earlier today.
We apologize. We don't have any slides.
We don't have slides.
Okay, I think probably everyone's tired of slides now.
Yeah, that might be true.
But we have copies, and they're very short applications. It's like 2 pages.
It's 1 page front and back. But that's kind of the point of the grant, is that this is not a federal grant program. This is money that comes from the Human Links Foundation that Tulip Alliance then manages the grant process. So it's designed to not be burdensome because it's not as huge of awards as the federal grants programs. It's grants from around $2,000 to $20,000. But it's just to fund things that you need to make improvements on your farm. So that's kind of the high level of the grant. This year, the major emphasis is really on regenerative practices, and that's kind of the point of the grant. The official title is the Washington State Organic and Sustainable Farming Fund. So the idea is to fund projects that are enhancing the sustainability of your farm business, whether that's like economical, social, or environmental. And this year, one of the big focuses is like on adopting regenerative practices.
Right. So everybody know what that is? Regenerative?
Nancy, I had a request that you speak up a little.
Okay, sorry. Does everyone know what regenerative is? General sustainable? Okay, let's kind of like one step further. It's mitigating climate change, cover crops, composting, sequestering carbon back into the soil, those type of projects. So that's what we're looking to fund. That's kind of what we've been funding over the past few years. But this year we're also adding, because, climate change, trying to mitigate that. And one thing is also helping farmers, which I know is probably not in this audience, but conventional farmers to transition to organic, or not really certified, but organic sustainable practices. Because we feel in all the research we read that amending the soil really makes a difference in mitigating climate change.
So, yeah, question.
Did you say that they're on the website that we can print those off?
Yes. So, yeah, that'd be
You guys have a
great.
card or something?
My card is here. I have one left. I can also write down.
And I don't have any cards.
Yeah, I can take a picture. I can write down my contact information for you. But I think kind of to reiterate some of the things that were said earlier today, is just getting to know us. Like if you have specific questions, if you want to bounce an idea off of us, we can never say, oh, you will 100% certainly be funded. Never gonna be able to say that. But if you have questions about your project, contact both of us. That's what we're doing between now and January 17th is the deadline. And I very strongly encourage you to get your applications in early. I know that we keep saying that. I think last year I had almost 100 applications come in on the
Last day.
which logistically, I'm the one person that manually collects all of those applications. It's not we don't have software, it's just me. So
It was pretty low budget.
I have a frequently asked questions kind of based on my experience from last year that I can just go over a few things if that would be helpful, and then we can also just do some Q&A if you have questions that are. This is the instructions and kind of the overview. Again, it's front and back, or I think it's actually 3 pages printed. And then the Word document of the actual application form is a Word document that you can download.
This is basically it. It's 1 page of information and then a narrative. And it's like 7 questions.
Way easier than USDA.
And 2 letters of support, so we do ask for those as well. But we get questions about how competitive the grant is. Even though it is not as burdensome, it is highly competitive, and it's only getting more competitive every year. Last year we got 100 applications and we're able to fund about 35. And that's not necessarily full funding.
Right,
So
we do some partial funding as well.
we do a lot of partial funding because kind of the goal is to be able to provide support to as many people as possible.
As long as they meet the right criteria.
Yeah. So that kind of gives you an idea for what you're up against. And I think what Angela was saying earlier with the childhood hunger and then the domestic violence example, that was like, you know, every single person that applies, I would say, like, you read the application and we see the need, but it's just keeping in mind that, like, it is competitive and there's a limited amount of money that can go out. So making sure that, you know, it's not just the story in and of itself that you have a farm and it's hard. You have to really have a very specific project, be very to the point. We do have word limits in the application because we want it to be super concise. So it's pretty straightforward, and that's another thing that we're looking for. And what makes a really strong proposal is very concise, to the point, projects that we're able to see are going to have a really big impact on your farm.
Following instructions is really important.
On that note, I am going to request and be a bit more firm about if you submit a proposal, that you submit it as a single document. If you want to mail it, that's fine. Just send it in one envelope. If you want to submit it electronically, submit it as either a single PDF or single Word document. So that includes your letters of support. I just spent way too much time combining everything into a single document last year for our grant reviewers.
And there's free online programs to convert something to a PDF.
Oh, I know, I maxed out my free limit on every single one last year. So you all, it takes 30 seconds, but that really adds up with 100 applications. One question we get a lot is, if you've received a grant before, are you eligible to apply again? In order to kind of set clear parameters of kind of what that looks like about eligibility, we came up with a policy that an individual farm business is eligible to receive up to $20,000 over a 5-year period. So if you applied for a grant in 2017 and you applied for the full $20,000 and that's what you received, you're not able to apply for another grant until 2022. But on the other side, if you applied for a grant in 2018 and your grant was for $3,000, you would be able to apply for up to $17,000 within that 5-year period, if that makes sense. Talk about partial funding. Partial funding is awesome. Love partial funding. You made all of partial funding.
Matching funding also, if people have partners, is also really something we have to.
Yeah, so those matching funds are really important. But partial funding, it's a way that we're able to still feel like we're giving support. We get a lot of applications that I would say are really 4 projects in one. And so I would just ask to be very intentional about what the ask is for and to make sure that's all bound around a very specific project. Because, you know, we're trying to fund as many people as possible. So, and if you're, I think a competitive proposal also, if you are, if you know that you are applying for a project and you kind of have like the primary project and you have some of those secondaries or supporting parts of that project, but you're like, we would be okay, this project could continue without that. Make it very clear in your application, kind of like what the funding priorities are for you. So then when we're doing a review process and if we're trying to make it, if we're in a situation where like, okay, well, we could partially fund this one project, you know, make it very clear for us about where that cutoff is and kind of like, does that make sense? Okay, good.
Are you more inclined, so I apply for $10,000, but like I really need 5,000. Are you more inclined to partially fund, or is it better if I apply for 5,000?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think it depends on how many applications we have and how the scoring is, because I think our intention is to help as many farmers as we can. So I think I'd rather have you apply for the 5,000 so then other people can be eligible to get the other 5,000. I mean, you can apply for the 10 and say that this is really what I need, and you know, I like these other things, and maybe we would just partially fund you. But
I worry that if I apply for 5,000, you guys would be like, well, let's partial
But
fund.
we would only fund the project. We either fund the project or not fund it. We're not going to fund. Well, you need $10,000 for one thing. We're only going to fund a little bit of it. I mean, it has to be a part of a project.
Yeah.
Right?
The flip side to this conversation, I just want to, or to this point, I want to make another point on is we also don't want to get you in a situation where you get on over your head. And I think that that's kind of a thing that's been talked about today is that grants are great because it's free money, but it's also like, it's a huge commitment. And you don't want to get in a situation where it's not like a loan and you're incurring a huge amount of debt. It's kind of a different way of thinking about it. But it's still like, we don't want to sit you down the path of being on a project where you realize that like all of a sudden it's getting way more expensive than you thought and you have all these other higher costs. The goal is to set you up for success. So if it's a project that you're like, well, I guess we could get by and we don't need that other money, like we're not asking you to do that. Like ask for the amount that you need to complete the project and that's going to make you successful. But just if you, like sometimes we have one project that's this theme over here and then we have another project that's not really related at all. So if you're providing from multiple components, just make sure how those are distinct.
Right. And sometimes, you know, some people apply for the $20,000 max and they just kind of write as many projects as they can for that $20,000. In my mind, that's a detriment. We want you to apply for what the project really is and what the costs really are. And we really want, like Erin said, people to succeed. So we're looking at a minimum of 2 years of farming experience. We don't want total beginner farmers. If that makes sense.
Another question we get a lot are nonprofit farms. I don't know if we have any nonprofit farms in here. I would say that a nonprofit farm is not ineligible, but they would not be the priority. The priority for this grant are typically individual for-profit farms who are trying to make a living off of their farm.
Nonprofits have lots of other avenues of grant.
Correct.
Exactly, which is kind of the whole reason this program exists. Are individual farm businesses allowed to submit multiple applications? It's only happened once last year. We had an individual farm submit 2 applications and they had 2 different names down because there's 2 different partners. Don't do that. Please just submit 1 application per farm per year. And like, because I mean, that's the sort of the case. It's like some people submit applications and it's like, it's truly 2 different projects in 1 application. And this farm, it was 2 different applications and 2 different projects and 2 different applications. So we considered them as one, but just 1 application, 1 project, please.
Also, you skipped one about cannabis.
Yeah, at this point in time, we are not funding cannabis projects. We can talk about it. I knew that question was going to ask, that's why I skipped over it. So the other question we get a lot are multi-year grants available? Not at this time. This grant, another thing to keep in mind with your project is funds are awarded in March, and then the project needs to be complete by December of that same year. But a great thing about this grant is the money comes to you up front. It's not a reimbursed grant, which is some of the federal ones are. You get your check in the mail, but the project does need to be completed in essentially a 9-month period. So in your in your narrative section, I think that we see some applications come in that someone says like, oh, I'm going to complete this project work in August, and I'm going to build this whole infrastructure in August, and then we're sitting here like, well, that's kind of a time of year. Is that really feasible? So that's just, I mean, 9 months sounds like a long time, but it's not. When you think about when you have to complete this project work, It might be during your peak season, so just another thing. to think about.
And we do ask at year end, we do send out reports. So we need you to complete the report, tell us how you're doing, how the project went, how you spent your money, had you any successes or any failures or any differences from the original project.
And that would be due in March.
So the application is due January 17th, and then you will be notified whether or not you've been awarded by early March. And then at that point, we will collect, there's a grant agreement form and then a W-9 that we collect for you. And then once we have all those from all the awardees, we mail checks that should be out to you in early March. At that point, nothing really needs to happen between our communication until like December of the next year. But during that, March through December, that's when you're doing your project work. And if you have questions or concerns or something's taking longer than you thought, or your supplier of compost changed that you thought, anything comes up, you can just email me. It's just nice for me to know that you're thinking of me and that
And sometimes people, one person sent the money back because they couldn't complete their project.
Don't do that without talking to me. Somebody just showed up and don't do that, just talk to me.
Bookkeeper?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're asking for a W-9, is it reportable income?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Nothing is free.
I want to reiterate what you said. It is now open and applications are due by January 17th. Okay?
And then
That's coming up.
Preferably earlier than that.
similar to the value-added grant, would you guys entertain helping make the grant stronger for clients if they turned it in a little earlier?
I would say that, I was actually thinking about that. I think that last year we shifted the grant deadline up earlier and opened it earlier. And I had one application come in before the end of the year, and that was disappointing because I was like, we opened it 2 months earlier.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of people call me, before the deadline, and then everybody called me the week of the deadline, and it's
hard.
not the most.
So would you entertain that before the new year?
I think if you submit, I would say if you submit an application, I'm not gonna really even read it. So I'm not gonna go through, I have a lot of other
Well,
things.
how about, don't submit it, but ask questions.
Email with questions.
That's the point I was trying to
Or
make.
if you're trying to get something clarified.
Yeah.
We'll definitely will respond. We're not going to go and say, you can't, send us an application.
Yeah.
We're not going
If you have questions, you can call or email me all you want. But once you submit your application, I will check it for completeness. And I will let you know if hey, we didn't get a letter of support from you. I'm happy to do that. I would prefer that it's all in a single document, and I will be more firm about that. But I'm also pretty nice, but I'm firm.
Just trying to
working on it.
But
I'm the one who's firm, but I don't get the application.
There was one other thing I wanted to say to your point. Yes, if you call me before you submit, and if you submit well before the deadline, I'll be able to let you know if it's complete. If you submit at the deadline, I'm not going to let you know if it's complete. So I think that answers your question.
The sooner you respond and turn it in, better.
Just because of the sheer volume that come in today. I'll get to your question in a second. I wanted to finish the timeline of the year. So checks get mailed in March. Project work is carried out March through December. Early December, I email all the awardees of that year with the 2 final reports that we have. They're also very straightforward, like the application. Should take you no more than 2 hours if you were really putting in a lot of effort. But it's just to say how it went, did you spend all the money, what did it go to, making sure it was spent in the ways that you said it was going to be spent. And then that's it. So it is pretty straightforward.
So my conservation district does it's a reimbursement program for native hedgerows and some irrigation, water management practices, water meters, and compost, right? Those are 3 different projects. They pick one. And I stack what they're hoping, because it's a 75 match, right? And I'm still on the hook for 25%. Can I ask you for that 25%?
I would say yes, because I think it has been done.
I think so. I'd probably have to see the application, but we're looking for matching funds. One time somebody submitted an application and they said we need $10,000. We're going to do this bulk composting CSA, but they still needed to raise $10,000. So we went back to them and said, you raise the $10,000 and then come back to us and then we'll consider your grant. And they went back and actually raised more than 10,000. And we did give them the grant, so.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Would it be considered matching funds?
I think,
Like, I already have a strong relationship with them. It'd be easy to bust out and have a complete project ready to rock and roll. And I just need that seed money.
yeah, are you asking if, for your conservation district, if we would be the matching fund for that, or if the conservation would be matching funds for us?
No, it's my project.
Okay.
That they supported and gave me a 75% like reimbursement program.
Okay,
And then you need the 25%.
You for basically the
Yes.
matching 25 for that.
Yes,
Yes, as long as it's under.
yes.
Great idea.
No, that sounds great. Matching funds are not required, but they are greatly appreciated and encouraged.
Right.
If we were talking on that.
It leverages the money we have to spend. We only have a limited amount to grant each year, so.
I have two more frequently asked questions that I'll just touch on. We get a lot of questions about whether or not project funds can be used toward labor, which I think would, in federal speak, it could be like considered the indirect costs. And this is something that it's challenging because the work that you're doing, like your time is the labor. So what we have said, our policy we've created around labor costs is any labor that is just the general operation of your farm would not be eligible to use project funds. But if it is, if it's like, oh, we're going to pour concrete and I personally have that skill and I'm going to like do it myself rather than hiring it out. Essentially, it's the work that, if the labor that's being done would be considered contractual because it's outside of what your regular job description entails, then that would be allowed. So you could say like, oh, me, even though I'm the farmer, I have this other skill and I'm gonna do this and it's gonna take me this many hours, and I'm gonna like have that cost covered. Because the flip side of that would have been if you had to go out and pay somebody to do that, that cost could be used to cover that, if that makes sense. But as far as like, oh, this is gonna be a big project and we're gonna have our interns, our interns need to do all this stuff to get it all ready for the project, like that sort of stuff is not allowed. Does that make sense? Okay.
So we're going pretty quickly because I know it's late.
Yeah, sorry.
Does anybody have any questions? I know we're going pretty fast.
The last question I had was about group projects. Last year was the first year that we had a few people ask about group projects. And we had one project come together really successfully and one come together a little bit less successfully just because it was a new thing we hadn't really done before. So based on that, I would say that if you are, you're trying to create some sort of, I'll just use the example of last year. So last year in the Met-Tao, I think there was a similar situation where they had, they basically used our grant money as kind of the remaining funds that they needed for a larger project, so kind of like a match, to buy a slaughter facility because they had, up in the Met-Tao, they had a lot of livestock producers and had to drive really far for slaughter facilities. So that was a project where they had one person who was a point of contact, who I was working with to submit the application. But then in the application, they cited that was like, oh, here's the 90 people that will benefit, 90 individual farm businesses that are going to benefit from this project. So that to me was a really successful group project. That was then really easy for us logistically. We had another group project try to come together where they had 8 farm businesses and they basically filled out 8 of these forms, and it was just like, that was less successful. So if you're interested in a group project, I would say call me first, and generally speaking, have one person who's going to be the point of contact who's going to say these other farms support this, but this is the one person who's going to manage everything about that. I don't know if that was relevant, but there we go. Any other questions?
Last minute questions on over the train?
There's a lot of train.
At home, do you guys have any questions?
Otherwise, yeah.
There's a question.
Oh, not specific necessarily to you guys, but I'm not sure if Carlotta brought this up, but there is another USDA grant called the REAP grant that pays for clean energy projects like solar. my program at the Conservation District helps farmers like you, yes, helps farmers like you apply for the grant. We do the grant writing for free, so you don't need to go through all this. So, and I know the Humulines grant also pays for clean energy projects. At least you have it listed, so.
So would you help people with this application?
Potentially, yes.
Ooh, that's a great resource, guys. It's
So,
awesome.
So
I have cards at the table right there. Nick Cusick. Yeah. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you guys so much. Sorry we ran over. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Before you see out, is there any farmers here that are on our website that don't have a placard yet? Because I have a stack of them here and I need to make some more. What's your farm?
For like,
Are you on our website yet? Ooh, sign up on our website. Yeah, take our card. All these things are here for you to give to your customers too. They're not just for you. So if you have a farmer's market booth or a farm stand, take a stack, send them out. Don't do any good in my desk. Take stickers.
I played this one. And I don't know what it is today.
Let me say goodbye to these people.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.